You're live.
Okay, it looks like we're live. Thank you very much, Hillary. And I'd like to welcome the public and everyone else to the June 24th, 2020 Planning Commission virtual public meeting. We will now call this meeting to order. Roll call, please, Tammy.
Mr. Sale,
Here.
Mr. Matthews,
Here.
Mr. Waldman,
Here.
Mr. Klein,
Here.
Miss Butler,
Here.
Mr. Imes.
Here.
Mr. Harold.
Oh, my bad. My bad, Mr. Harold.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, from that roll call, we do have a quorum and this meeting can proceed. I do want to say that Mr. Harold had made mention of this meeting possibly being his last. Would you like to elaborate on that, Mr. Harold?
Not particularly. It's the end of my term is the end of the month, and I've spent 10 years doing this, and so I'm ready to give way and make room for somebody else.
And thank you very much, Mr. Harold. And pending anything that differs from now until then, we will look forward to seeing you again, maybe, or not, depending on how that goes. Okay, the first thing that we have on our agenda would be approval of minutes. And I believe, Tammy, you were unable to generate those minutes. Correct me if I'm wrong, last minute. Could you elaborate on that, please, Tammy?
No, I did not complete them. So I would appreciate if we could defer them to the July 2nd meeting.
Okay, so we do not have our meeting minutes, so we will have to defer those till the July 2nd meeting. And also, it kind of rolls into the fact that some of our items are pushed over to the next meeting as well. So we're going to see how that kind of dovetails into it. So we'll move on from minutes. Any comments from the commissioners on the minutes? Okay, moving on to the public hearing section. We have two items that we are continuing from our last meeting. And there were also public comments submitted. The first one is OTAC 18, TAC 20, the E-Track-It project for institutions for care of the aged, for the purpose of adding institutions for the care of the aged as a permitted use in the PM2 Professional Mixed Office Park District, and establishing bulk regulations subject to specific standards for institutions of the care of the aged. And this is continued from June 4th, 2020. Is there anything that the commissioners would like to add and comment to that initial hearing? The public hearing is continuing right now. We don't have to reopen it. It's already been open and it's still open. Any comments?
I have just one question. Were there any additional comments submitted via the form?
No, there were no additional public comments submitted.
Mr. Sale, you're muted. Mr. Sale, you are muted. There you go.
See that. Thank you very much. My space bar wasn't working as advertised for that moment, but it has been working. Is there anything else commissioners would like to add that they may have heard in the public hearing open time and since our last meeting, or anything like to add for the institutions of the care of the aged?
I suggest that we close the public hearing and go to discussion.
I would second that if that's a motion.
It's really not my call.
It's really more of a procedural thing there. Thank you, Bob. You're right. Well, that's a correct procedure. So no more. If anybody else does not have any public comments they have gathered from the public from planning and zoning, which we heard, we don't have any more on the E-Track-It project track number ZTA 2020-001. We can go ahead and close public comment and move on to our deliberation discussion, which we're moving to now. Comments from the commissioners.
I have a question, Ben.
Go ahead.
I I thought the material that we were provided was a little bit confusing in that we were hearing from a specific company, I guess, that's involved in the care for the aged, is almost as though they were an applicant. And this is actually a revision to the zoning code. It's not an application. So I just wanted to make sure that we had fully separated those two things and that this in no sense was an application looking for approval. It was a straight modification of the permitted uses in the PM2 zoning code.
And you're mentioning with regard to the public comment that we did receive, being from someone not a regular old individual from Annapolis, correct?
Well, yeah, it was a company involved in care for the aged and how their proposal wasn't going to generate any additional traffic, and it was wonderful and we should approve it. And that I found a little bit disconcerting. So I just wanted to be reassured that in fact, that wasn't what we're up to.
Understood. Any other comments from the planning and zoning or other commissioners with regard to that?
My only comment is that this is a move towards basically getting rid of use-based zoning and all the acrobatics that we need to do sometimes towards a more sort of form-based attitude and perspective.
And as I've said in the past, I'm always in favor of more uses per zone. As long as they're not hugely incompatible.
I'm going to move to approve this change in the permitted uses to that zone.
I'll
We have a
second that.
motion to approve and a second from Mr. Pline. Is that correct, Mr. Pline? Second?
Correct.
Okay. There is a second to, there's a motion to move to approve the institutions for the care of the aged not amended as presented. And we also have a second. Any comments? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion passes. OTAC 18 TAC 20 for approval as presented, non-amended. We recommend approval to the city council. Any other comments?
Okay. Do we have a findings prepared? Or suggested findings?
We have the rough shell, but nothing that I would shove to you right now in case we ever had any other comments from this meeting. So we didn't want to jump the gun and write a complete one, but we do have the shell roughly drafted. So I guess the answer is no. Is there any
okay.
recommendations to add to those findings? We just made the motion. Is there anything else?
No.
There couldn't be, so, okay. Any further questions with OTAC 18, TAC 20, institutions for the care of the aged? Pending no further questions, we'll move on to O-10-20, written notification requirement for the purpose of increasing the distance of sending written notification to abutting property owners for planned developments, major subdivisions, and major site design applications. This public hearing is also continued from our June 4th meeting, and we had significant questions about the range used for that notification and the reasoning behind that. Are there any other, and the public hearing is still open for that. So over to the Planning and Zoning Department on any public comments. Do you have anything to add, Sally?
Nope, no additional comments.
Anything to add for the E-Tracket project submissions by the public?
No.
Okay. Is there any other, has everyone had the chance to re-review and stay apprised of what's going on in the E-Tracket project number? If anyone hasn't, please advise and we can bring that information up for you right here.
Mr. Sale, would it be appropriate at this point to sort of summarize and perhaps even enter into the record the memorandum that Mr. Henry, the counsel for the commission, wrote.
Just as a point of order, should we close the public hearing before we get into the discussion of the additional input?
Yes,
I don't know.
yes,
That would be a public comment item though, wouldn't it?
no.
Not really? Okay, if that's not to
Staff-
deal with
It's
public.
staff work, staff advice.
Okay, so if we don't have any other, that's true, because that was the email we got late today. Okay, is there any other public comment items that anyone is aware of that was supplied to them to bring to view on this, at this meeting? No? Okay, pending no other public comments that were submitted via the website in our access window, we will now close the public comment session for O-10-20 written notification requirement for the purpose of increasing the distance for sending written notifications. On to deliberations by the commission. Comments by the commissioners.
Well, as Bob mentioned, I think we should enter the opinion provided by Mr. Henry, and we can discuss that if need be.
I concur in that. Ms. Hook, can you get a copy of that, or should we send you one?
You can also display it,
You can send me one. I don't have a copy.
Okay.
and it was sent at 2:19 p.m. Is this something we should display to the public?
Yeah,
on our open screens here?
Could you send it to me too?
So Tammy, you want a copy?
Yes.
And Sally.
And Sally. Okay, give me 20 seconds here. And anyone else want to make comment, go right ahead while I'm doing.
My observation is that this is still not fully baked. If we're getting comments at 2:19 this afternoon, the language hasn't been revised. It clearly has some structural problems with the drafting of the legislation. I think the intent of the legislation is probably worthwhile. But my own concern is that devil is in the details, and getting it down on language on paper is the step that needs to be taken and hasn't been taken. So I would say we need to go slowly with respect to approval or disapproval at this point. Sounds like the Director of Planning and Zoning hasn't even seen it yet.
Hold on a quick second, everyone. In Mr. Henry's document, it's a planning commission only document. So I can only share that with the planning commissioners on here. So to share it outside of that would not be fair. So for Tammy and Sally, I cannot send that to you. And if I accidentally just send it to you, do not open that email. So.
Wait a minute. Okay,
If I can
if
say
we
one
enter
thing.
this into the record, we lose our attorney-client confidentiality.
Did you read it, Bob? Were you able to read it?
In this circumstance, it doesn't mean anything. It's a legal opinion that was drafted for us. It should be read and understood by everybody on the commission. We're a public group, and it should be entered into the record. So the hesitation to make it public, I think, is really misplaced. Mr. Henry?
I'm the attorney to the planning commission. So when I write a public opinion or a private opinion to the board, by giving it to the public, it's therefore becomes available for all and critiques. My duty is to protect the board or to the planning commission, and that's where my duty belongs. That's
Okay.
why I put that in my email.
Okay, I understand. Thank you. But this is the sort of thing that all of us raised. We raised the questions publicly. It's the kind of information and analysis that we should have, in our brains as we make our decision. And so I'm going to suggest, unless it requires a motion, but I'm going to suggest that we make it part of the public record, that there's nothing confidential that we need to protect here. It may be the right opinion, it may be the wrong opinion, it may be somewhat right and somewhat wrong, but in any case, it's just an opinion that goes into our deliberations.
I would agree. I see no reason why that why the public shouldn't be able to see that.
I
Okay.
concur. I feel like it should be something the public could see.
Okay.
You know, everything we do as a planning commission is public. That's what we're here. We're here to be transparent and open for the public. The public wants us to be, I want us to be. There's no hiding anything here. And also for the city should be transparent and open to the public. And Mr. Henry, I'm gonna allow you, or I'm gonna request from you another couple of seconds of, after hearing what the commissioners are stating here and myself, I mean, do you still feel that it shouldn't be shared, or should you be allotted time to review it before we share it or something? I mean, please elaborate once again, if you can.
Just generally, I'm trying to protect the attorney-client privilege. If you guys believe as the planning commission that it is not something you wish to protect, there's really nothing I can do to stop that. I just always err on the side of making sure you know before you degrade a right that you're aware of it.
Okay, that sounds very fair. So I guess it's over to us. Are there any other questions from the commissioners on this at the moment before I ask for a motion to enter this into the record? Anything
Ben,
else? Go ahead.
And I was just going to repeat that we found some problems with the language of the draft legislation. And in order to get it fixed, it has to go back to the people who can fix it. And so they have to understand what needs to be fixed. So I would support entirely sharing Mr. Henry's memorandum with them, and in that way it can be brought forward, hopefully in a better fashion.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, any comments with regard to the motion made by Mr. Harold and seconded by Mr. Bob Waldman to enter in Mr. Benjamin Henry's council email and attached letter today into the record? Any comments?
Well, would this require us to have another public hearing after it's
No.
done?
No.
Okay.
Not hearing any further comments. All those in favor of entering Mr. Henry's comments to the commission into the public record today, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion passes. We will enter into the record for OTAC 10, TAC 20, written notification requirement legislation, Mr. Benjamin Henry's as an example of evidence. And Tammy, I'm not sure what letter, alphabetical letter we would give it, but I'll have to look at that.
It
And
would
thank
be
you,
B.
everyone. Go ahead. Did you
It
say
would be B.
B? Bravo. Thank you. And you know, that's a good example of everybody working together and we getting over a little speed bump like that. So thank you, Mr. Henry. Appreciate that clarification. Mr. Waldman and Mr. Harold and everybody else for clarifying that.
So let me go back over what the questions that we raised. The first question had to do with the definition of abutting and whether that was appropriate in that circumstance. And what I gathered from the memorandum is that abutting is interpreted as meaning not only property owners which adjoin the property at issue, but also those nearby, because we've said that people within a certain distance have to be notified. And so therefore anybody who's within that distance then thereby becomes, quote, abutting for purposes of later appeal. Is that a satisfactory summary of what you said, Mr. Henry?
Yes, just basically saying that if you were to interpret abutting as meaning only adjoining property owners, then the 200 feet as the legislation sits now would be meaningless. And there's a common law principle that basically states that you can't interpret a statute to have meaningless portions. And that's what that would do. Every
Okay.
property owner's abutting within a certain number, it's 0 feet. They're connected.
Okay. Do you know of any precedent in cases in Maryland or elsewhere in which this kind of similar situation has arisen, and those people who are within a distance were notified and thereby become, quote, abutting?
And can you hold on a second? To be fair to the public, I have the document and I'm going to share it on the open screen for everyone to see, if that's okay. And then we can go through a paragraph, and the paragraph can at least be shown to the public Otherwise, it really isn't public
Okay.
record. Is that okay? While you guys are talking?
That's fine with me.
Okay, go ahead with your conversation. I'll display it.
That I just want to feel comfortable that if, that if we change the distance, that area now includes quote abutting. That anybody within that area is considered abutting, and is that correct?
It's not necessarily that they're abutting, it's a conflict of terms. Abutting generally it means abutting, like we discussed at the last meeting. It's just, it's a common law principle where it would divest certain meaning to the language. Basically, it's section 211020 B1B, that section where it says 200 feet. It would be a pointless portion of the statute. I mean, there's no particular, to my knowledge, no particular precedence for a particular situation like this. What I'm referring to is called statutory construction. And that's,
Keep going. Pardon me.
no, that's fine. Continue.
Well, so, and your suggestion is that simply we recommend that in the title, if I recall correctly, it's in a title to one of the subsections, that we simply recommend that the council change abutting to nearby.
Nearby, I know you had suggested neighboring at the previous meeting, and neighboring is also one of those terms where, depending on if you're looking at a layman's term interpretation, or if you're looking at neighboring, can also have the same issues as abutting. So
Okay.
nearby, I thought, was a term that was not confusing.
Thank you. I tend to agree with you. There's probably some etymological history to how nearby and neighboring got merged, but be that as it may, I understand what you're saying, and I think it's a wise advice. Now, moving on into standing issues, do you care to give us a summary of what you came to?
Just basically the questions that were asked at the last meeting involved, what would this adjustment have to standing itself? And if I remember correctly, what were the jurisdictional issues if someone wasn't notified or things along this line? Standing generally requires a person's aggrieved and they be a party. That's if there's no other statute providing other ways for a person to have standing. Aggrieved is something where it affects your rights. It affects you personally, and it's not generally the same as, the public in general. And then a party, there's different ways people can become a party. Public comments can make someone a party to a particular board or hearing or whatever it may be. And usually those are the two requirements to have standing to be appealed. Now, this deals with notice. Now, notice doesn't give a person standing. Notice is more of a jurisdictional issue. Without proper notice, if the applicant doesn't provide notice, because based on this legislation, the applicant is the one who's providing this notice, then it divests either the commission or board of their jurisdictional ability to hear and decide a case. And that can then in turn be used to create standing where standing doesn't exist. Now, there's certain exceptions, and these exceptions can be, for example, actual knowledge. If someone wasn't provided notice and they have actual knowledge and they show up and they give their case, then the jurisdictional divestment becomes kind of moot. So those are the two issues and how they kind of play. Now, if you have an applicant who's providing notice to these particular individuals or nearby neighbors, the applicant's going to want to make sure that every person has notice. And that's important, because if they don't provide proper notice and someone comes back and attacks them later, then that's when a commission or board's opinion can be overturned. So it's a detriment to them.
So let me go kind of back to the beginning a little bit. The fact that a person is within the area of notice, 200 feet or 500 or 750 feet, whatever is decided here, does that make a person automatically aggrieved?
Not necessarily. Aggrieved is determined on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
And there's plenty of statutes and different case law that says that. So, I mean, it could be, it could not be. It really depends on the case, and all the case law generally points to a case-by-case basis.
Okay. Okay, so we're not necessarily expanding the class of plaintiffs or appellants simply by extending the area of notice?
No, the first issue is the jurisdictional issue. That's what's affected most. If you don't give, if by expanding notice, you are theoretically giving yourself, the boards and commissions more of a chance to divest themselves, or in this case, the applicants are giving more of a chance to divest the board of the jurisdiction by not providing notice to these particular individuals.
Okay, but let me just make it, if I can, fundamentally clear. Simply by extending the area of notice, we're not necessarily expanding the class of people who can appeal, because they have to show that they're specifically aggrieved.
That is correct.
Okay, all right. And that's a case by case. If somebody 500 and 800 feet away could be particularly aggrieved, and somebody actually close by on the other side of the property may not be. So simply by extending the radius of this circle, we're not necessarily creating more litigation.
No.
So that's the kind of the first thing. And if the appellant applicant fails to give notice and a person appears and gives testimony, it indicates that he had actual knowledge and he can't divest us of our jurisdiction and create an appellate issue later, correct?
Generally, yes, that's the case.
Okay. All right. I don't know. Have I confused things, or have I tried to make them simpler?
I think you've done a great job.
Well, dialogue helps, as Socrates once said.
For me, the issue here is that expanding that circle doesn't automatically give somebody standing. That
Right.
the key is that being aggrieved is a case by case basis, and that's the critical thing to me.
Right.
You know, if it just ends up being an issue of, you know, does an applicant have to, in these circumstances, have to do a little more work to, you know, to do a few more mailings? You know, if it's really just that and it doesn't have any other implications, that clarifies it for me.
Mr. Harold, can I ask you, you were the one who raised a very interesting point about whether failure to give notice automatically gives somebody, quote, standing. But I think, has it been answered for you if somebody does not give notice, what the repercussions are?
I guess so. Mr. Henry seems to say that notice doesn't confer standing, so they seem to be independent. It seemed to be whether you're aggrieved. Or at least that was my understanding.
But to
Yes.
clarify, if someone doesn't have notice and they don't receive actual notice of the proceedings going on, then that can give them standing to appeal.
But they still have to show that they're aggrieved.
How about this? If somebody's 2,000 feet away and they show that they are aggrieved, then they're a part of it regardless of the distance. It's all by public notice. So that kind of answers it for me, right? If you're aggrieved and you can prove it, even no matter what your distance is, it applies. Is that correct?
That's a good way to put it.
Okay. And in the rare instance in which somebody does not receive notice, does not have actual knowledge, doesn't come to testify or anything of that sort, and later appeals, really all the effect of that is it divests the planning commission of the value or the authority of its original decision, and you go back to square one and do it all over again. Doesn't really say the decision was right or wrong. It just says procedurally you made a mistake and you got to go back to square one. So it gives them standing, but it's kind of a limited standing, if I get it. All right, I don't have any further questions.
Any other comments or questions? Any other comments or questions by the commissioners?
Just one general comment about this legislation in general is, you know, given that community associations and more than just individuals have to be notified, there are many ways for people to find out about these things. And, I think most of the time, if you're anywhere near there and you don't know because, somebody didn't send you a piece of mail in the, piece of paper in the mail, seems a little out of touch to me.
21.
I think that what we may be facing here is a familiar dilemma, which is whether to send this back to the creators to ask them to fix the problems, or whether the planning commission in its infinite wisdom decides to rewrite it for them. And certainly most people know that I come down on the side of, we're not very good at writing legislation. And I would much prefer us to send it back with a notice of, problems observed, be they major or minor, and simply ask that they be addressed. I was certainly paying careful attention to Mr. Henry's memo when he described it as inconsistent and confusing, which I agree with. And I think that another trip through the editing mill by competent attorneys would clean it up significantly, and I would feel more comfortable supporting its enactment after that.
And there is also another option of whether we just don't support it.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll put,
Go ahead.
I'll put the matter to issue to a vote. I'm going to suggest, I move that we recommend approval of changing the area of notice to 750 feet. And that we also strongly recommend that the legislation be that 21-20-020B, which I think is the right place.
I believe it's 21-10-20.
21-010? No, 21-10-020B, that the words, a word abutting be changed to nearby. Just, and that's the only, that to me, that's the only stylistic change that needs to be made. But if there's a second, I will explain my reasons. So I'm moving approval, recommending approval.
I second.
Okay, there's been a motion to move approval at, as written and submitted at 750 feet with one adjustment to nearby for the properties, vice the other possibilities of abutting and adjacent. So is that correct, Mr. Waldman? Does that sound correct?
I believe so. I think that's the only place where abutting shows up. But if not, anywhere in that section where it says abutting, it should be changed to nearby, just for clarity's sake. Okay, here are my reasons. First of all, I think that's, minor and it's cleaning up things, but I don't see a whole lot of difference between 200 or 250 feet and 700 or whatever it is, 750 feet. I don't think that the costs to the applicant are all that much. And I think that, and generally we in the city as a whole has been moving towards being more informative and, getting people involved to the extent they want to be. And that's all that this does. If it were an expensive proposition to applicants, not all of whom are moneyed, oftentimes they're, not big time dealers. I might think differently, but I don't think that the costs are very much. Having had some experience recently mailing something out from my community association, and it was a matter of a few $100s. So those are my reasons why I think, why I recommend approval.
Okay, and to rehash real quick, and this was said at the last meeting, but I just want it stated, please, Sally, this 750 feet would apply to, I'm going to make it a simple question so the public can understand. This 750 feet would apply to which types of zones? All or certain types of zones? Dr. Nash?
It applies to all, in all zoning districts. What it depends upon is the type of application that we, the Department of Planning and Zoning, receive.
So we're,
Does that make sense?
so to make it clear for the public, if you're going to add on, let's say a residential area, and you're going to add on a garage in the back, or add on an addition to your house,
Not required.
would that fall into it?
No, because in most zoning districts, that is just a building permit application.
Got it.
There are some zoning districts where you would need a site design plan approval for that, but that would not be a major site design. That would be a neighborhood conservation site design,
Roger.
residential neighborhood conservation site
And I'm
design.
sorry if it sounds like I'm asking a very elementary question, but I'm trying to make it elementary for understanding of the public here, that it's not going to affect everyone and everything that they're doing on their property. This affects bigger type things, specific applications coming to the Planning and Zoning Department.
Yeah, more specifically, plan developments, major subdivisions, and major site design.
Yes, people with projects, organizations that are very large, have a very large budget, and this is small. And I know it is one more thing to add on to a developer, and that doesn't help, but it does help the public for being notified and not feeling like something happened that they weren't aware of. But the properties will also be posted. Things like these are posted on our website. Whether that we do that well or not in planning and zoning is debatable, but we are improving as we go on. And I think this is something else that actually could help out with the property owners and make more people aware. Does anyone else have any comments? Okay, so there was a motion to recommend approval, which would mean forwarding on to the city council, not sending this back to be rehashed as submitted, but change the verbiage to nearby, and also include the comments. The important part here is, will we include our comments from Benjamin Henry in our package as we forward that up the chain or not? Because that's comments to us. It does help amplify and explain, in my opinion. Anyone else, Bob?
It's fine with me. I think the first paragraph, the first section of his memo is the most relevant, but
Yeah.
it's fine with me. I mean, if they read it, fine. Explains it.
And it's already been entered in as evidence to us, so I think we should forward it up. Dave, anything?
I think that's fine. Nearby is great.
All right, anyone else? All right, looking at Diane, our other lawyer on staff, so. Okay, there's been a motion, a second. All those, any more comments from the commissioners? Okay, all those in favor of recommending approval as submitted with a slight change to nearby for a 750-foot distance increase of written notification for these types of projects, say aye.
Aye.
All those
Aye.
opposed?
And
Mr. Harold is in opposition. Any abstentions? Okay. The motion passes.
I think
Tammy, do you have
Mr.
all you need for documentation on that?
I do.
Okay, moving right along. PD 2020. Go ahead.
Ben, who's gonna finish up the findings for the last two items?
Send me the template, I'll do it.
Okay, I have sent it to everyone, but I can send it again.
Okay,
I didn't see it.
all right,
Send it
Bob.
again. Just send it to me, I'll do it.
Okay, I was gonna also volunteer, so if you want to split it or whatnot, we can work that out later, so
I can do it.
we'll work, okay. Glad to help, though.
Thank you.
Before we get started on the next thing, I'm conflicted out of the next two matters, so I will be leaving the meeting. Just wanted to put that on the record.
All right, say that again, you're conflicted with the next two issues, or you can't stay around to
Yes.
help us?
I cannot.
Where are you
Why not?
going, Mr. Henry? Where are you going, Mr. Henry?
Where am I going?
Yeah.
To Mr. Hyatt's firm.
You're conflicted on the next two matters? Okay.
Yep.
All right, well, Mr. Henry has excused himself. Thank you, Mr. Henry. No more legal representation. But do we require any legal assistance by the commission? Or are we requesting any for the remainder of our meeting? Anyone? I guess we don't have it if we request it. Benjamin, are you the only attorney we have access to for assistance during these meetings?
I believe there has been a new council who has been put in place. I can't remember her name, but there will be a new council in place who is supposed to be reaching out to me shortly so I can help transition her into her new role.
Okay, that's awesome. And Miss Raftovich, do we need to change him? How so here? Or, Mr. Henry, are you going to be presenting at all on these next two items at all? Or?
No, I'm just leaving. I'm leaving the meeting altogether.
Okay, thanks. Ms. Raftovich, could you remove Mr. Henry? And I'm sure he'll remove himself. Thanks again. Moving on to PD 2020-001, residential plan development and preliminary record plat by Penrose applicant and the Housing Authority, City of Annapolis, to consider the redevelopment of Newtown 20, specifically to replace 78 affordable housing units with an equal number of new units and a new community building. The property is located at the intersection of Newtown Drive with Brook Court and Betsy Court. Over to the Department of Planning and Zoning for any presentation.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Hope everyone's able to hear me. For the record, my name is Thomas Smith, Chief of Current Planning with the Department of Planning and Zoning. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to ask for one point of clarification or perhaps a request of Commissioner Harold. He mentioned earlier this evening this would be his last hearing. But tonight's hearing on these next two items are carried over till July 2nd for the hearing and a vote. Is it possible that Mr. Harold could participate on July 2nd for these two items?
You're muted, Bill. Bill, Mr. Harold, you're muted. Thank you.
I don't believe that I could participate July 2nd. No, thank you.
That
My
does
term expires.
it brings up the legal issue. If you have a commissioner present for, well, it would be the same as if a commissioner had to leave a meeting, I would believe, Mr. Smith.
Yes.
That if
I just
someone had leave
wanted to
during the
make
middle.
just wanted to make a point of clarification that he would
Good
be
point.
participating this evening, but then not continuing for the hearing or the vote.
Your vote just would
Well,
not.
my understanding was that the Newtown 20 was carried over from the last meeting. Surely you don't mean to carry it over yet again.
No, we had a work session.
Correct. This is a formal public hearing for the first time on this application.
I have a question pursuant to that. Is there anybody who thinks they will not be here other than Mr. Harold? Anybody will not be here on July 2nd?
But
Then we'll have a
just-
quorum.
Just a point of clarification, though, it's my understanding that Mr. Harold can stay on the commission as long as he wants until they replace him, unless he resigns.
That is correct.
Okay. But it's his choice whether to stay or not.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, I was thinking it was a resignation. It's not a resignation, Mr. Harold?
It is.
Not yet?
No, my term expires. I've finished 10 years as of
Oh.
the end of June, and I'm out of here.
Okay, so it's not an official, for clarity, then it's not a resignation, it's a term timeout possibility. Cool, so, okay. So back to Mr. Smith, my apologies.
okay.
Excuse me, Mr. Smith. I mean, if you would be more comfortable if I left the meeting now, I would be happy to do so.
Absolutely not, Mr. Harold. I wore the tie just because it was your last meeting.
Thank you. But it's not your bow tie, is it?
Not tonight, sir.
Oh.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that clarification. I also want to express my apologies to Commissioner Butler, who I believe was unable to clearly read some of the plans that were sent electronically. I'm not sure why, but we'd like to correct that in the future so she is able to read all the applicants' exhibits clearly that are sent to her in advance of the hearing. I'm going to attempt to pull up and share some drawings with you before I begin this presentation, so please bear with me a moment. Are the commissioners able to see the plan on the screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So this is plan development application 2020-001 for the redevelopment of what is known as Newtown 20. The housing authority for the city of Annapolis, known as HACA, and Penrose LLC is a developer. They are actually co-applicants that are seeking a residential plan development approval and preliminary record plat approval this evening. The parcel you see here is 6.45 acres in total and is zoned R3 General Residence District. These existing units that you see here, there are 78 of them. They were built in 1971, and what was once a thriving neighborhood has certainly fallen into an age of structures in disrepair and are scheduled to be demolished. The applicant proposes to replace these 78 dilapidated, for lack of a better term, units with 78 new units. So there was a no net increase in the number of units. And this isn't the first time that HACA has partnered with Penrose. They've had very successful and revitalization in public housing in the Clay Street neighborhood with the redevelopment of O'Berry Court and College Creek Terrace. I think anyone who's been by to see those developments would certainly say it's an absolutely beautiful community.
Can you zoom in, please?
Is that helpful, Mr. Chairman?
It does. For the public, thank you.
So this project, Newtown Drive, which comes in off of Forest Drive, is then bisected into two courts, Brook Court and Betty Court. What is being proposed this evening, and this drawing I've pulled up here, overlays the proposed layout of the development on top of the existing development. So you can sort of get a spatial relationship between existing and proposed on one plan. What was really influential in the design of this plan was trying to create a sense of placemaking and establish a community identity as a singular identity. With the two cul-de-sacs, it's really been a bifurcated community, and the grade drops between the two cul-de-sacs an entire story. So the intent was to unify the community on a single grade with the community center that's proposed at the beginning of the loop road, at the end of Newtown Drive, which really works to really, I would say, call a sense of invitation into the community and centrally locate the communal elements of the project. I'm going to attempt to, I don't blow up too much. So this image here shows the existing development on the left and the proposed development on the right. Existing aerial photograph of the project and a colored rendering of the project. So you can kind of get an idea when I mean an existing bifurcated community versus trying to establish one unified community. I think this image on the right certainly shows that. From a preliminary record plat standpoint of view, to reiterate, there's 6.45 acres in this project. 0.656 acres will be dedicated to public right-of-way, which leaves the remaining 5.79 acres in ownership by HACA, and the existing right-of-ways of Brook Court and Betsy Court will be vacated by the City Council. This is perhaps the most vanilla, most simple plan development request that the Commission will probably have before it. And so there's one item that I think is unique to this. Otherwise, it's a very straightforward plan development application, and that is the alternative parking standards. So at the request of the Planning Commission during the work session, there was a desire on behalf of the Commission to see if we could eliminate, we, staff and the applicant, some of the parking spaces on site. So the applicant has provided an alternative parking needs study that shows today there are 78 parking spaces for the 78 units at a ratio of 1:1. The city code requires a ratio of 1.5 to 1, which would be a total of 117 spaces. The applicant was able to take a look at the site plan since the work session and eliminate 17 of those spaces, thus proposing an alternative of 100 spaces for a ratio of 1.29 to 1. So that's actually a 28% increase over the existing number of parking spaces. And I think in their alternative parking needs, as I'm sure the commission read, the bedroom types change from the current 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units to predominantly 1 and 2 bedroom units. And that should help with the alternative parking standard. Moving on, I wanted just to spend a brief minute on forest conservation, because I know Mrs. Butler, Commissioner Butler, excuse me, had some questions on that. So there is no forest on this site today, as you can see from the aerial photograph, which puts the code tells that you have to afforest to the threshold, and for residential development, that threshold is 20% of the site. So that's 1.29 acres the applicant has to reforest. They are proposing 1.73 acres, so almost a half an acre above and beyond. And the majority of that 1.73 acres, 1.5 acres is being provided in the form of street trees. I know that the applicant intends to, I think, probably go into more detail with that this evening. I'm going to stop sharing now. I will turn over any more of a presentation to the applicant and their consultants, and then come back and give the staff's recommendation, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, Tom, while you're there still, I have a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks for helping me out on that. The 55 street trees that equate to 1.59 acres of tree canopy, of mature tree canopy. Do you know where that guidance comes from? I was just looking for it at the Maryland FCA technical manual, and I didn't see that kind of guidance. So I'm wondering where you got that.
Yes, ma'am. It does have its basis in state law. So about a year after the state law was adopted in '91, they recognized, the state, difficulty for urban municipalities to establish forest. So the state law allows credit for street trees in their mature canopy. They use what's called a manual by Penn State University called Street Tree Fact Sheets, which gives the list of all large trees and their 30% of their mature canopy area. So in this case, they've chosen to use Platanius acerifolia, which is a plane tree, also known as sycamore, which has a mature canopy of just a little over 1,200 square feet per tree. So we as a staff urged the applicant in its reforestation to look at street trees first, even though it's perhaps the most expensive form of reforestation. You get the most shade out of the street trees, so the most bang for the buck, if you will.
Should we wait for questions after the presentation's complete, or do you like it like this as you go?
It's completely up to the commission, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to go on as we are.
How much more does the staff have to present before anyone else?
That is all I have at this point, other than a recommendation.
Other than a recommendation, huh? That's all you
Yes,
have?
sir.
So I'd like you to complete your recommendation, then we'll ask you any other questions.
Certainly. All right. So the commission received a staff report dated June 22nd, 2020. And in that staff report, we've gone through all of these standards for plan development, for a preliminary subdivision, for site design, and found that the application meets and exceeds all of those standards, as well as it meets the objectives of the Annapolis Comprehensive Plan. So we've recommended approval with 18 conditions. Those 18 conditions are frankly standard. I hate to use the term boilerplate, but they are germane to literally every plan development. So that's our formal recommendation. Happy to answer questions.
Okay. And after you present, we would then open a hearing. So any other questions of staff right now? Ms. Diane Butler, I believe you had the floor for questions if you want to continue.
No, I just wanted to point out that 20% is the minimum. I think somewhere I read that the 20% of the 6.45 in terms of afforestation was more than the minimum. It's the minimum, and it's fine.
Yes, that 20% is the threshold for this particular land use.
That's all I have.
Any other questions by commissioners? I have one other question for the staff. You said the city requires a deal more parking spaces than was in the design, but yet parking spaces were also added. Is that correct interpretation?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. So the city code requires 1.5 parking spaces per unit, which would require 117 spaces. The applicant has requested what the code refers to as an alternative parking for a reduction to 100 spaces. This was similar. We did this exact same exercise when we approved the O'Berry Court College Creek Terrace public housing project. They have requested alternative parking there.
How's that working out? How's that working out as far as spaces available?
From what we've been told from HACA, and I know they are here this evening to testify, I think it's working out rather well. We actually utilized and counted both on-street and off-street spaces. So that is part of the parking calculations, not all off-street spaces. It's both on-street.
Okay, and so not an issue. And a big ticket seller is, what did you do with that property? What did it turn into?
We actually increased the green space and added some more afforestation.
So we're adding green space, forestation, less pavement, yet not losing what parking is actually needed due to recency of experience and what we know to be the fact. So all goods. Thank you. Anyone else?
Thank you.
Yeah,
So-
Mr. Smith, also the, is it true that that also led to being able to increase the porch size by eliminating certain parking? Is that's also?
Yes,
what-
that was, I was actually going to let the applicant get into that, Commissioner Pline, but yes, that was another request of the things that were spoken to during the work session, and the applicant was able to increase some porch sizes, not all. I will say the increases did facilitate the functionality of the porches, but it also helped the aesthetic of the front facades.
And Mr. Smith, what's the planning and zoning department, well, or your opinion of community involvement with regards to this project and its drafting? From what I saw, it seemed to be very good. What's your opinion?
Yeah, I actually have not, as of 5 o'clock this afternoon, I've not received any feedback from the public at this point. I know that the alderwoman of the ward is supportive of the project.
Okay, and I believe that so much was done in advance for this project that maybe that's why we haven't, but we'll have to develop, right?
Quite a bit.
So that's, I'm fair to move on. Any other comments for or questions for the departmental staff before we move on to presentation?
Well, just one follow-up on that last point. So there was, way prior to the lead up to the application, there was a lot of input from current residents who will eventually reoccupy these new units, and essentially buy-in from the current residents.
And I think HACA can probably speak more, Commissioner Pline, but yeah, I believe they even included a survey of what the residents would like to see and not like to see or increase. The applicant had a community meeting as required before filing their application. So yes, there has been a fair number of community input before getting to the work session and now the public hearing.
Great.
Any other commissioner questions or comments that are needed from staff? Staff, anything left to present?
I'm fine, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for asking.
Okay, well, we would then like to move on to the presentation by the developer and then on for public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Alan Hyatt. I represent the applicants tonight, Penrose LLC and the Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis. And I'll just start by saying there certainly has been substantial input by the community, more so than I've seen in most instances. We started in the beginning with a polling of the residents. We had a lively community meeting. It was significantly well attended, and the issues were raised clearly by the community. The concerns were raised, and I think they were addressed. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but this had an abundant community participation, I'll say. So as you've heard from Mr. Smith, and as you saw at the work session, this is the Newtown 20 community. And what we're asking for is a major modification to a plan development. That's the terminology. And that requires us to go through the same process as a new plan development. So that's why we're here, and that's why we submitted the application as we did. As Mr. Smith stated, this is a 78 multifamily unit community. The property is really bifurcated by these two courts, Betsy Court and Brook Court. Not a great job of planning as we look back in hindsight, but it was built in the 70s, and it's like two separate neighborhoods, disjointed and just not well done. The project is in a significant state of disrepair. You've not only heard that from us at the work session, you heard it from Mr. Smith, you probably read about it in the newspaper, and it's important that we go forward with this redevelopment. There are currently 78 three-bedroom dwelling units on the property. What is being proposed is to replace them with 78 units. 1/3 would be one-bedroom units, 1/3 would be two-bedroom units, and 1/3 would be three-bedroom units. And that allows for an alternative parking arrangement that we have submitted in our package that I think makes sense. The residents want to have ample parking because there's really no place to go. This is at the end of Newtown Drive, and if you can't find a parking space, there's problems. So we have done the study. We have allocated 100 spaces. It's more than what's there now, and we think, based upon the studies, that it should be more than sufficient. And it helps reduce impervious coverage and does supply additional spaces that the residents are looking for. I did mention at the work session that we've had a few obstacles to overcome. Not to dwell on these things, but we're anxious to go forward, and there was a holdup because of some oversight in legislation where any other plan development that offered some level of moderately priced dwelling units was able to get a 20% tolerance on height. And the legislation as originally drafted didn't allow that for projects like this where you have 100% moderately priced dwelling units. So that was changed. And now it's within the authority of the Planning Commission to grant the 20%. So we're asking for a height of 40 feet, up to 40 feet here. And the code allows for 35 feet. So the request to the Planning Commission is that we be given that 5 foot of tolerance. We've also submitted legislation, as Mr. Smith mentioned, because roads that are in place now, these two courts, have to be conveyed from the city back to the housing authority, and then the housing authority in turn proceeds with a conveyance of the new configuration of the road. So that's again, it's a little bit of housekeeping, I'll call it, but it's all part of the process that we're going through to try to get this approved. I do want to point out that there is virtually no stormwater management on site. And our civil engineer, Rick Kelly, will talk a little bit more about this. I know you are aware that in a redevelopment project, there's a requirement to treat 50% of the site, that's the code, And then there is a resolution that the city council adopted early in 2019 that stated that it was the desire of the city council that redevelopment sites treated 75%. It's difficult for us to treat 75%, as you will hear from the engineer, and I will tell you why. It would impede the viability of the open space, and it's expensive. If this was a for-profit community, I don't think I would be in the position, or I wouldn't feel it was appropriate to make that ask. But here you'll see that the budget is tight, and this would be a travesty, really, if this project doesn't go forward. And I can tell you that, and you probably recall that since that resolution was adopted, I can't think of a project, a redevelopment project, that didn't achieve the 75% treatment. But in cases like private development, there's an opportunity to pass through some costs to the ultimate users, and we just don't have that here. So, I would ask you to carefully consider the case before you, and I think that the incremental benefit of this site achieving 75% and leaving it at 50% is outweighed by the benefits to the community, and from the to the people that are going to be living there, because they need safe, affordable, sanitary housing, which is not there today. So tonight I have given the record, I've provided for the record a package of exhibits. It's 1 through 10. And I think there should be an exhibit 11, which is Mr. Haynes's professional biography. And for purposes of the record, I would offer that into evidence. And each of you should have a packet of exhibits, but you don't have the full exhibit number 4, or the packet behind exhibit number 4. That's part of the master package. If we need to refer to any specific drawings under tab 4, then I know Hillary is able to access them. But for the record, I would offer that into evidence at this time. And then I will be referring throughout the presentation to the exhibit package. And so the proof we have to make tonight, and I'm going to try to move right along through the process, but I do have to make a record, because we are asking for planned development approval, site design plan approval as part of that. We are asking for approval for the alternative parking standards. I mean, these are all spelled out in the code. And part of the planned development process requires us to prove to you that we satisfy section 21.71 of the code, which is the forest conservation portion of the code. And so tonight we have our team ready to testify, and I'm going to ask them questions, and I'll call one at a time and try to move it, go right through the process. I will first call Melissa Maddox Evans. She's the executive director of the Housing Authority. Then I plan to call Patrick Stewart. He's a representative of Penrose. You heard from him during the work session. Rick Kelly will testify concerning civil engineering matters. Chang Lee will testify regarding architecture. Vernon Husted is our landscape architect and site planner. He will be called on to testify. And then finally, I will call Kevin Haynes. He's our forester. He did the work on the forest conservation part of this community, and therefore any questions related to those specific topics should be directed to those specific.
Okay, thank you, Mr. High. And I know you're not done, but I just wanted, before you proceed on,
Yep.
the tab 4, I want to be clear on that for everyone. Tab 4 in our packet you just mentioned is really just a reference tab. and the
Yes.
plans are not in there since they're so big, and it's understandable. And, but where would a commissioner at this moment, if they didn't have the plans in front of them, get those, other than going to E-Track and looking? Did they didn't get them in the work session, they got a rough plan, but not a final one.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Go ahead.
I did send those plans to the commission in the electronic form. You received those in the original email that Kevin Scott sent.
Okay, and that was, I believe, was that a week and a change ago or longer than?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
A week ago.
Okay, so if anyone wants to go look at those plans right now, if you don't have them, look for the email from, say the name again? Scott, right?
Kevin Scott on June
Kevin.
17th.
That's right, Kevin Scott. And also you can go into E-Track it as well and look at the files. So, all right, just want to make that clear to everyone. They understand where the plans are, because it's, otherwise somebody might make that comment. All right, thank you. Proceed, please.
All right, thank you.
Any
I'll
other
call-
questions? Good.
Okay, I'll call Melissa Maddox Evans, please, and ask you to state your name and address for the record and tell the members of the Planning Commission what you do for a living, please.
Sure. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you today, commissioners. We're very excited to present our application to you. My name is Melissa Maddox Evans. I'm the Executive Director, CEO of the Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis. I've been at the Housing Authority for about 9 months now, and I am excited to be able to be a part of such a great project. So we are very happy to be here and glad to explain why this project is before you.
Okay. Why don't you take a couple of moments and explain to the commissioners, please, how the proposed plans came about? You know, what was the need for a comprehensive redevelopment, and please tell them what the current conditions are at Newtown 20.
Sure. As previously stated, these structures were built in 1971. Some considerable time has passed. The buildings have clearly gotten to a point where they're beyond their useful life, beyond normal maintenance, normal upkeep, normal capital, even capital improvement stages, to the point that trying to repair the buildings would end up actually costing more than trying to just start again and build anew. And so our concern, of course, at HAC is for the quality of life of our residents. And so we decided to pursue application with HUD to grant us the permission to begin a demolition disposition project for Newtown 20. And we are beginning that project. It is actually the first stage of several projects that we plan for revitalization purposes for our properties. So we plan to revitalize all of our properties in different phases. And this is phase 1 and the very first and a very important project. And so that's really why we wanted to pursue this new construction project.
I made the members of the Planning Commission aware that you're partnering, or the Housing Authority is partnering with Penrose LLC. Is it possible for the Housing Authority to go it alone, so to speak, to redevelop this site with its own funds?
Currently, no. The Housing Authority has very limited non-discretionary funds, which are the only funds that we will be allowed to use to redevelop our properties. Currently, our revenue sources are about 95% federal subsidy, which means those funds have to go directly to the public housing projects. So renovation, rehabilitation, new construction projects have to come out of non-discretionary funds that a housing authority may have. And so far, throughout the history of this particular housing authority, it has not been able to build those types of revenues in order to pursue redevelopment projects. So we, of course, have the need to partner with different developers that have expertise in the affordable housing industry and the desire to provide quality housing for our residents. And for this particular project, we selected Penrose.
And in fact, the Housing Authority has partnered with Penrose on other projects. Is that correct?
Correct.
Which ones are they?
Sure. We partnered, of course, with Oberry Court and College Creek, that project, a very successful project, beautiful homes, and residents were very satisfied with the units. And in fact, it's one of the properties that residents from our other public housing sites desire to transfer to or move to when they have availability. So it's a very desired site within our housing portfolio. So far we've had a great partnership in the management of those properties.
So I just want to conclude by asking you this. When I first got involved in this project, it preceded your tenure at the Housing Authority, but there were concerns raised by not just residents, but members of the community as to the displacement of residents during the redevelopment. Could you tell the commissioners how that works?
Sure. Well, as part of any renovation project that a housing authority pursues under the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program or the Section 18 HUD disposition program, we are obligated under federal law to provide residents the option for replacement housing, one-for-one replacement. And so, and that is something that we would want to do anyway, even if those laws weren't imposed upon us as an agency. So all of the residents who have currently relocated to other properties will have the first right to return to the properties. It is their option to return to the properties, but they get the first right to accept those new units.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions at this time for Ms. Maddox Evans. Shall I proceed to the next witness, or do you have any questions?
I have one quick question, Melissa. So when the folks that have moved out of Newtown 20 go to move back in, will they be subject to basically a new application process?
They will be subject to a application process as it pertains to the LIHTC, which means a low income tax credit housing application process. And so, but as far as qualifying, whether or not they're able to qualify for the overall program, they're already qualified because they're already in our public housing portfolio. So there will have to be a process for them to sign on to the tax credit program. And that's for, of course, compliance purposes. But in essence, they're already qualified to come back to the property. So they don't have to requalify in that aspect.
Thanks.
I have a question. Now, so some of these people, they might have had 3-bedroom units before and they may not decide to come back. Is that my understanding?
Yes, there have been a couple that have just decided to move on, and they may have received a housing choice voucher and they just want to live in another location.
Okay, and also, how do you manage parking at one of these? Do you give people permits, stickers?
Sure.
How do you manage so that you don't have cars that are just dilapidated, which has been in the past?
Right, we have parking passes.
Okay, and you make sure there aren't dilapidated cars or cars out of service there, and make sure everything is
correct. Yes, we have a towing service and towing contractors that deal with abandoned vehicles.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'll call my next witness if that's okay. And that would be Patrick Stewart.
And also as a commissioner, we can ask anyone questions at the end. So it doesn't have to be now. You can save your questions at the end or ask them during. Thank you.
Mr. Stewart, you have met the members of the Planning Commission just last month at our work session, but if you would kindly just once again, just for the record, tell them who you are and what your business is.
Sure. Thank you, Alan, and thank you, members of the Planning Commission, for the opportunity to present tonight. My name is Patrick Stewart. I'm with Penrose. We're a multifamily developer and manager, focusing primarily on affordable housing development, and are partnering with the Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis on the Newtown 20 redevelopment.
And how long have you been with Penrose?
I've been with Penrose for 8 years. My position is senior developer, and my role in relation to Newtown 20 is basically managing all aspects of the redevelopment effort on behalf of Penrose.
And you are aware that, of course, that Penrose has partnered with the City of Annapolis Housing Authority on the Oberry Court and College Creek communities, and how's that worked out for you?
That yes, very much aware of that, particularly in Maryland and this region for Penrose. That's one of the projects that we're the most proud of. It's one that I had the privilege of being involved in for the third and final phase, but as others have noted, very successful example of the positives that can be achieved through a public-private partnership to redevelop and revitalize public housing. And so we did partner with the Housing Authority of City of Annapolis on that, and are very proud of our involvement in our work on that one.
I know the financing structure can be very convoluted on these types of projects. And I don't think you have to go into intimate detail, but I think it would be helpful for you to explain whether you're seeking tax credits from the state or other public funding to make this project feasible, and just elaborate, if you would, on what's involved and the timeline for that type of financing.
Sure. So the project is reliant on about a dozen different funding sources to make it happen. Projects like this are obviously very challenging. And Newtown 20 is a good example of that. I think there's some particular challenges and constraints that we face with Newtown 20, one of which is the project not being able to get 9% low-income housing tax credits. So we rely on 4% tax credits. That obviously you can tell that that's about half as much tax credit funds as you would get for compared to 9%. So those account for about a third of the project costs. The remainder of the funds are sort of a combination of state, city, and local funds that and county funds that we've had to work together with HACA to raise, because the main challenge with a project like this is because of its affordable nature, it can't support enough private loan funds on its own. So, combined with the tax credits, you cover a portion of the costs, and the remainder comes through subordinate loan funds to the extent that they're available, generally speaking. So as it relates to sort of timing and time constraints, I'd say that one of the big challenges that we're considering right now is because of the economic downturn, that some of the loan funds that we're relying on from the state, if we can't sort of get to the closing table, so to speak, soon enough, that those might be at risk. We're trying to achieve finance closing, start construction in August, I would say no later than September. And if it, from a schedule standpoint, if it slips beyond that, you run the risk of terms changing, interest rates increasing, which reduces the amount of funds that the project can support and things like that. So from a timing standpoint, there definitely is a lot of time sensitivity.
So what happens if you have any extraordinary costs? I mean, if your budget is exceeded, is there an easy way to cover that, or no?
Nothing. I would say nothing's easy. Any cost increase basically creates a funding gap. We can't pass the costs along to somebody, an end user, as you might be able to in a market rate development. You could charge higher rents, or in a home ownership development, you could increase the sales price. You can't do that with affordable rental housing. And we can't go ask for more funds from the state. As I noted, resources are very limited. So if costs increase, it generally creates a funding gap, which puts the project in jeopardy.
I think the members of the Planning Commission understand the site. They've seen it now. This is the second time they've had the documents, the plans, but why don't you just do an overview for them of the the basic features of what's there now and what's being proposed.
Sure. So without going into all the details, I think it's been covered, but the fundamental challenge here is this 78 unit public housing development. It was built in the 70s. A lot of aspects of it were you could consider sort of obsolete and really no longer meeting the needs of residents. That's the main challenge. So our approach from day one, and we've been working on this project for a little over, frankly, 2 years at this point, was to start a process that was led by and really engaged residents to inform what the new plan was going to look like, and that was informed by some of the challenges that the existing site and buildings faced. So just a couple examples. So there are grading issues. You have the cul-de-sacs, as we talked about, which really kind of separates one half of the neighborhood from another. You have in the middle of that is a sort of a grading depression that's contributed to some water infiltration, accessibility issues. You have obviously the cul-de-sacs, so we sought to find a way to reconnect the community. And then you had limited community space. There's a very small, about 1,500 square foot community building with basically one room for activities and meetings with residents. Those were some of the challenges and issues that residents highlighted early on that we wanted to address. So in doing that, the plan that we put together calls for comprehensive redevelopment of the site, literally from the ground up. So demolition of the existing site and buildings, which are now vacant and are moving towards demolition soon, hopefully. Regrading the entire site to address some of those grading issues that I mentioned, replacing all 78 units. But as you know, in comparison to the sort of uniformity of the older buildings, now with the diversity of building types, scales, and heights that we took care to think about in context to the rest of Annapolis. A brand new, approximately 3,500 square foot community building, which is more than double the size of the old building. It's centrally located and kind of prioritized within the site, and includes much more space for activities, meetings, et cetera, for residents, as well as management space, lease up space, maintenance space, everything like that. And then in terms of the site, construction of all new roads, infrastructure, public and private utilities, stormwater management facilities, enhancing circulation, again, by connecting the road, and vastly improving the site's performance from a stormwater management standpoint, particularly compared to existing conditions. So that's kind of the overview. And again, I'm sorry, landscaping that we're going to get into, tree plantings, open space, and then very important for the residents was putting back the recreation amenities that they currently enjoy. So the tot lot, playground equipment, and the basketball court. And then, of course, adding parking, as we kind of talked about, or Tom mentioned earlier in the presentation, compared to what's there now.
So having been involved in this project from the inception, I've noticed that there's been an evolution of design, and you've worked with the planning staff and you've received input from residents, and you heard the priorities expressed by current Newtown 20 residents.
Mm-hmm.
Could you just take a few minutes to explain that history and how the site plan and architecture evolved over these last couple of years, and the input that was received by you from residents and others?
Sure. So going back again to the beginning of 2018, which was when we really started Penrose and our design team in earnest in sort of tackling this project after we were selected by the Housing Authority. The immediate goal was to make sure that resident input and feedback, they're the ones who know the most about Newtown 20 and what are those challenges and what things do they want to see incorporated into a new plan for the future, to make sure that it made sense and for how they lived and what their needs were from an amenity standpoint and open space standpoint, all those things. So we set up a series of design charrettes where we had residents in the room in the community building. We went through slides and images from recent projects that we had done to get, and literally had them voting up on a screen which building types did they like, what was their priority or preference in terms of open space in compared to some other options on site and things like that. So all of that led to some really meaningful input in terms of building site and design, site layout, recreation, and open space, and all of those things. In a lot of ways, not much has changed fundamentally from that point. So except for, some details here and there, I would say recently the big changes that we've been looking at making, we've talked a little bit about, but we're in response to some feedback that we got from the Planning Commission at the working session. So specifically looking at that parking issue and seeing if there was some feasible ways that we could reduce pavement, reduce impervious space, but still meet the needs of the residents. So we think we found a way to do that. We've reduced the number of parking spaces down to about 100. And then another comment was in relation to the porches on the buildings. So we were able to actually find a way to expand the sizes of the porches at all 5 buildings that have them, which we think is a win, taking into account some of the aspects of the facade design, things like that, that sort of limited the extent to which we could go a little bit further than that. And then in terms of, I guess I'm just thinking a little bit further about comments that we received and how we address them. So site lighting was another one. There's actually a slide in here where we didn't make changes to the site lighting specification, but tried to show based on some examples of recent projects that we've done and an example that we found of a very similar lighting type, what the sort of character and quality of that site light would look like. I'm
the one who asked that question at the last at that work session, and I saw the submission of design, and that was very nice. I liked what was added into the packet, but there were some comments from some people in the interim. Was one person, I forget, made a comment to staff about lighting and crime cameras. I don't personally like to design lighting and assume crime's going to happen. I'm not for that, but the comment was made that the lighting still needs to be sufficient and very bright for the cameras to work that might be used in the project. I don't know, that was comment made. Any idea? So over to you on that.
Thank you, Commissioner Sale. I think if I'm not mistaken, that comment might have come from the police department in the context of their review of the plan development package. So we've actually had several meetings with the police department, and they did. It's actually started out with a discussion about what did they want to do with the cameras at the existing development. They have been pretty adamant that they do perceive a need for security cameras. So we have worked with them to figure out how to sort of build that need into the infrastructure of the site, if that makes sense. So including wiring around the site and to make sure that there's the ability to add cameras based on the perceived need at the end of the day. And they did iterate that concern very specifically in kind of in relation to site lighting, that it's
so the site lighting could accommodate a future input of cameras by either you guys or someone else, right?
It could. What we've actually looked at, and we've shown them a plan where we could add cameras at the corners of the buildings and kind of achieve some of the same coverage. But they did voice a concern about making sure that we had adequate lighting, both building mount and site. So
okay, as long as you're accommodating that and it's being thought of. Thanks.
Right. Absolutely.
So Patrick, let me just follow up on the parking for a minute. In our exhibit package, particularly exhibit number 6, it's the alternative parking analysis that we went through. Just very briefly, are you satisfied after hearing from the residents that the 100 parking spaces will suffice? Will that be adequate for this project?
Yes, we believe it will be. And add sort of a little bit of additional detail. We didn't want to take this lightly. We did, understand the concerns from the Planning Commission and found an opportunity to kind of make the site plan better, but did obviously want to make sure that at the end of the day, we were accommodating residents' needs. We have one shot to do that. And as you noted, because of the fact that the site's kind of at the end of a dead end road, if you will, there's no opportunity for spillover parking. But we did find, based on HACA's, they did a spot count in November where they found that the existing parking of the ratio of 1-to-1, that was more than adequate. We've also gotten feedback from management over at Oberry Court that shows in terms of how people have utilized the parking and registered parking passes and things, that there should really be no concern that what we're providing at 1.28 to 1 would be adequate for what residents need.
Part of our request is to allow for a height up to 40 feet. Could you elaborate a bit on why you feel you need that?
Sure. So I guess the short answer is there's a lot that we have to fit on the site, right? So we have to build back all 78 units, and all of the features and amenities and facilities, utilities, roadway, open space, recreational amenities, the community building, stormwater management facilities, all of those things that take up space around the site, plus having to build back the 78 units. You can't really accomplish that with 2-story buildings, meaning we have to go up to 3-story buildings. It's a challenge to do 3-story buildings that are less than 35 feet, and still sort of be mindful of scale and proportionality within the buildings and things like that our architect could probably speak more intelligently to. But the bottom line is in order to get everything in there and build what we need to build, we had to go to a certain height. And we feel that 3 stories, we're not exceeding 3 stories in any place. The tallest building's 40 feet, which I believe still doesn't exceed sort of what the code allows you to do with discretion from the planning commission, which is 42 feet, if I'm not mistaken. And importantly, we think that the heights are consistent with, and respectful of surrounding context. So that's kind of the rationale behind that.
So one final question for you. Here we are after a couple of years where you've sunk a lot of your time into this project. I mean, I know you have. Do you feel that the design as we have today, are you comfortable, and is it something you're satisfied with, that you believe this redevelopment project is a positive one for the area and positive for the residents?
100%.
Feel good about it?
Yes. And again, I just want to note again, importantly, this took into account meaningful feedback from the residents, so that at the end of the day, it could be a place that they're proud of and that they're excited to come home to. They've obviously been through a lot over the years. There have been past attempts to revitalize Newtown 20, which didn't come to fruition for any number of reasons. So this really has been a long time in the making. But speaking for me, for Penrose, for my team, we're proud and excited to be part of finally moving this forward. And we feel strongly that because of that work that we did in the background and consultations with residents, and because of the leadership, I would say, of the housing authority as well, and input that we've gotten from the city, that it's designed around the needs of the residents, reflects their input, will create a sense of community and place, and achieve really a better neighborhood for residents and for the community. So yes.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my questioning of Mr. Stewart. Should I move on, or do the commissioners have questions for him?
Anyone have questions for Mr. Stewart? Okay, you can always ask them later, and we'll move on. Thank you, Mr. Hyatt.
Okay, I'll call Rick Kelly. Mr. Kelly, would you?
Thank you, Mr. Hyatt.
Tell the members of the Planning Commission who you are and what your job is and where you're located.
Sure. My name is Rick Kelly Jr. I am a professional engineer. Work for the company McKissick & McKissick. We are located at 901 K Street, Northwest in Washington, D.C.
And how long have you been in the field of engineering?
I've worked as an engineer for 20 years. I've been licensed as a professional engineer since 2006.
There's an exhibit number 8 that is your CV, your professional biography. Is that representative, or is that accurate? Let me ask you that.
Yes, it is.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure how you want to accept, or if you want to accept Mr. Kelly as an expert witness. I would offer him as an expert in the field of engineering. Sometime.
We as a commission do not recognize experts or deem them experts, but we accept his background and
Okay.
love to hear from him.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Kelly, you're familiar with the property, obviously, right?
Yes, yes, I
And
am.
You visited the site before?
I have.
And are you also familiar with the City of Annapolis Code and its requirements as it relates to this property?
Yes, I am.
And your firm and you perform the civil engineering work on this site, is that correct?
That is correct.
There is there's a preliminary subdivision plat. Have you had the opportunity to take a look at that? That's Exhibit 7.
I have.
And do you believe it satisfies the requirements of the city code?
Based on my review, yes, I do.
Okay. And that it's really one lot. I mean, it's 3 parcels, but it's one lot. We're not subdividing it into different lots. Obviously, the city gets the rights of way, but other than that, it's one lot for the use of this multifamily project. Is that correct? Did you hear me?
I'm sorry, I lost you there.
Yeah, I said it's one lot, right? Even though we're going through a subdivision, the site consists of a couple of parcels, but there's going to be land conveyed for roads, but it's one lot that's going to belong to the housing authority for this project, correct?
That's correct. Yes, it's one lot that will be divided in 3 parcels.
Okay.
One will be the right of way conveyed to the city, and the only reason there's 2 parcels that will remain with HACA is because of the way the right of way divides the lot.
Okay. So the property is zoned R3. You heard that, and the code has certain density standards for planned development use. And are you satisfied that this property meets the density standards?
Yes, it does. The property has total square footage of 281,169 square feet. Which if you calculate the density based on the units.
So 78 units are allowed, right? I think you're breaking up, or we have a bad connection.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I apologize. I think I'm having trouble with my internet.
Okay. All right. These are the problems with technology, right? So there's also a requirement for open space under the code, and there has to be at least 20% open space. How much open space do we have on this project?
Only 55%.
Okay, so well over the required open space.
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about stormwater management, if we could. Did you design the stormwater management plans associated with this project?
Yes, we did.
Can you explain how the plans meet the applicable requirements for stormwater management?
Sure. First, we worked to reduce the impervious area. We were able to reduce from the existing conditions down by almost 0.2 of an acre to the proposed conditions. We did that by limiting the roadway width. Also, the reduction in parking helped with that. From there, we designed microbial retention basins throughout the site to capture stormwater and treat for stormwater quality, capturing that water from impervious surfaces. From the microbial retention basins, stormwater is then conveyed to a detention basin at the southwest southwest corner of the property where it is stored and released at a controlled rate to the stream.
Are you designing, are you managing, I should say, for quantity and quality? And before you answer that, have you used the best management practices in designing the stormwater management facilities, which would include what is commonly called ESD to the MEP, or environmental site design, to the maximum extent practicable?
Yes, we are managing for both quantity and quality. We have different ways that we have managed that is we have changed the overall grading of the site to reduce the artificially steep slopes that were created during the original development. The reduced slopes lead to decreased runoff velocity, which lowers the risk of erosion. Additionally, the reduction of impervious surface allows for more open space, more pervious area, which will allow stormwater to infiltrate and be retained on site, which is further aided through the planting of the number of trees. As you've seen, there's 50 some street trees plus some additional afforestation on other locations of the site. And then also the micro bioretention basins treating stormwater close to where it falls, and that is one of the goals of the MDE stormwater regulations.
So in your opinion, does the proposal that you've prepared satisfy MDE and the City of Annapolis stormwater regulations?
Yes, I believe it does. I would again reiterate, as has been stated already tonight, that the site currently has no stormwater management. In addition to not having any stormwater management, the existing detention basin that exists in the southwest corner of the site is missing the riser, has been removed or broken at some point over the years. So that allows stormwater not only from Newtown 20, but also from Woodside Gardens to the north, which flows across the Newtown 20 property to flow unimpeded all the way to the stream. There's nothing there to control that stormwater flow at all. By installing a new overflow riser, when that basin is revitalized, that will control the flow out of the basin, which again is not just the Newtown 20 site, but also Woodside Gardens to the north. We have worked with DPW over the course of the last 2 years to identify priorities and have made revisions based on our conversations with them to the stormwater management system.
Question.
I assume since it's an existing project,
I have a question. I'm concerned about how do we fix Woodside Gardens? You just indicated that the stormwater management for Newtown was horribly deficient. But then you said it was further complicated by the fact that it was also absorbing all this flow from Woodside Gardens. So I can see how your actions might improve life at Newtown 20, but how do we get rid of Woodside Gardens?
I can't speak to what can be done on Woodside Gardens property at that location, but what we have done, and as we have to do based on the MDE regulation, is we have accounted for that flow in the detention basin. So our detention basin is sized to handle the flow coming from Woodside Gardens as well.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Kelly, I started to say since it's an existing project, there's public water, public sewer, so there's adequate utilities, I presume, to service the proposed project, right?
Yes, that is correct.
And the new infrastructure is going to go in for the road, so they should be adequate, right?
Correct.
Are there, just again, because the code requires us to ask, are there any scenic, historic, archaeological, or landmark sites or views on this site?
No, there are not.
And how about the locations of the proposed buildings and the open spaces and the whole circulation? Or do you feel like they're adequate and efficient as compared to what's there today?
Absolutely. With the loop road, that provides much better traffic circulation, not only for residents and visitors, but also any first responders that would need to come to the site. Makes it much easier to navigate.
How will waste disposal be handled?
There are dumpster enclosures provided at the 3 large parking lots. Each enclosure has space for a garbage dumpster as well as a recycling dumpster.
There should be no reason that any noise coming from this community would disturb any other communities, right? I mean, there's nothing here that would generate any noise, right?
No, we don't expect any noise above a similar development.
All right. And no additional traffic. As a matter of fact, should be less traffic because there's less bedrooms, right?
Correct.
And how about overall vehicle circulation and the parking? Do you want to comment on that? How's that flow?
We feel that the circulation, as I said before, will be much better with the looped road, 2-way traffic, the driveways, access into the parking lots is designed to be 2-way. Turning radius is large enough to make it easy to navigate in and out.
How about pedestrian traffic and bicycle circulation? Can the design handle that?
Yes, there are sidewalks on both sides of the looped road, which connect to public sidewalks at the entrance to the site.
And we've already talked about the parking.
All of the sidewalks have been designed to be accessible. I was just saying that the sidewalks have been designed to be accessible routes.
Okay, and I interrupted you, but we've already talked about parking. There's 100 parking spaces, 54 on surface parking lots, 46 on the street, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and then just to conclude, in your opinion, does this proposed project satisfy the engineering standards imposed on it by the code?
Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'll move on to my next witness unless there's any questions.
I have one quick question for Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kelly, first, thank you. This is a great improvement over what exists there right now. I was unable to see where the 17 parking spaces were eliminated. Is there any way you can tell me where those spaces went, or just identify where they are on the
Sure.
plan? I just have a copy of the plan we received.
Sure. There were spaces removed from the parking lot in the northeast corner, the lot in the southeast corner, as well as the parking lot on the west side. So the 3 large parking lots,
right,
as well as in the center of the development. I believe it's between buildings 7 and 8. We removed 2 parking spaces from that lot.
Okay, great. And then I didn't see a difference in the stormwater treatment calculations with the additional 17 spaces eliminated. Wouldn't there be a net increase in the amount of stormwater you're treating by eliminating those spaces?
Not necessarily, because it depends on where the impervious surface is that we are collecting stormwater from. We weren't necessarily collecting stormwater to treat from those locations where we removed the parking.
Okay, so that explains, so there's no further benefit in terms of environmental impact.
I would say that there is additional benefit because we have reduced the impervious area overall,
Right.
and we have taken the opportunity in those locations where the impervious was removed to plant more trees.
So that would be a net increase in the amount of stormwater that's treated. It's just it's not showing in your calculations.
Right. That's not really, we're not really able to calculate how much stormwater a tree is able to treat.
So you're not it's more or less you're not having any extra water to treat at that point. It's taken out of the equation, right?
Right.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, there's no doubt there's a benefit from those trees.
I would agree. I just thought there would be something visible in the numbers because we do want to say that we're treating 75% of the water, the runoff, stormwater runoff, rather than 50. And I would venture to guess with the elimination of those 17 spaces, we're probably closer to that number now. Okay, that wasn't a question, that was a statement. All right, thank you.
No other questions, please continue, Mr. Hyatt.
All right, thank you. I'll call Chang Lee as my next witness. I ask Mr. Lee to identify himself and his business address and his occupation for the record.
Hi, this is Chang Lee, architectural project designer from WRT, 1700 Market Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Mr. Lee, your CV is exhibit number 9, and it's in the record, and I'm not going to qualify you or attempt to qualify you as an expert, but that accurately describes your background and experience, does it not?
It is correct.
Okay, and you're familiar with this property because your firm helped design it, is that true?
That is correct as well.
Okay. Tell the Planning Commission how you approached the project from an architectural standpoint and whether you took preferences from HACA or the Housing Authority into account, the planning staff, neighborhood residents, and you also participated in last month's work session. I'd like you to just explain what changes have been made since the work session to the elevations, if you would. And then for the benefit of the Planning Commission, most of this is under tab 5, where the elevations are located. Go ahead, Mr. Lee.
Yes, WRT design approach started with the careful study of the existing site, context, and architectural characters of the surrounding, in consideration of the Housing Authority of City of Annapolis and Penrose goal, budget, and objectives. We also participate in a community engagement to understand their preference to get their input on the design process, including safety, walkability, community activities, vehicular circulation, ease of parking, and trees. This led to the proposed architectural design, which is complementary to the surrounding area in terms of building form, proportions, materials, and details. The design was also defined based on input from Department of Planning and Zoning, including work session that focused on providing more porches and trees and site lighting clarification.
So where you made the changes on the porches, can we point them out under tab 5? I think they're highlighted specifically on 5, 6, and 7 under tab 5. Is that correct?
That is correct. So in number 5, which is the building number 1, we have combined each small porches in the middle portion of the building and made it into one continuous porch, and also increased the size of the porches on each end of the building as well. In number 6, building number 2, since the middle portion already had one continuous porches, we increased the size of the porches on each end of the buildings to be consistent with the building number 1. For number 7, building number 3, 4, and 5, we increased the porch size in the middle. No changes on the each end of the building porches were made because we were trying to avoid the conflict with the brick materials.
So that makes those porches more usable in so many words, right?
That is correct.
Mr. Hyatt, may I ask a technical question?
Yes, sir.
When you say you changed the sizes of the porches, did you change the depth as well as the lengths? Were you able to hear my question?
Are you asking me or Mr. Hyatt?
I am asking you. You said that you changed the sizes of the porches. I'm asking whether you were able to change the depths of the porches, or did you change only the widths or lengths of the porches?
Well, long story short, only the width of the porches were made because the depth of the porch was already 5 feet inside. So we've kind of figured that it's already usable and deep enough for more activities in there.
Could you help me out a little bit with what 5 feet means and what can be done within 5 feet? Can you put an Adirondack chair?
Yes, within the 5 feet and with the openings, we can have enough space to turn the wheelchairs. 180 degrees in there, which is wide enough to have many activities as much as possible.
How many feet does a person in a chair need? You sit in a chair and you need how much of that porch are you filling up in terms of the depth?
Well, I'm just making a wild guess. So I'm guessing the chair itself is going to be somewhere in the 2 feet deep, and that leaves you with the 3 feet in front of you.
Okay, so there's not enough room for 2 people to sit facing each other, but you've increased the width or the lengths. Okay, so you can put more people in a row, so to speak.
That is correct.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There's certain requirements in the code about site design. Mr. Lee, the structures are supposed to be harmoniously related to the terrain and the existing buildings and roads in the vicinity and to the character of the city. From an architectural standpoint, could you respond to that? Do these satisfy those requirements?
Yes, the proposed site design is in response to the existing conditions, context, and design standards, and best practice to achieve the project goal. Particular attention was given to the building placement, vehicular circulation, parking, and open space strategy to prioritize the sight lines, streetscapes, and a sense of community.
Do you believe the architecture is compatible with the surrounding neighborhood? And does it offer efficiency and attractiveness?
Yes, I do believe it.
Now, you heard Mr. Stewart testify about the legislative changes in the city code, and I commented about it regarding the height. What is the maximum height proposed within this redeveloped neighborhood?
Well, per code, those heights can be increased by 42 feet. The proposed design has maximum height of 40 feet, which is allowable if approved by the Planning Commission.
Okay, so 35 feet is the maximum, but there's a tolerance that the Planning Commission can grant up to 42 feet, but we're not asking for that. We're asking for 40 feet. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. And then would you comment about the the building bulk and scale, and its appropriateness and facade, proportion, relationship to the street and the rhythm. Would you comment on those architectural items, please?
Yes, the bulk and the scale relate to adjacent and surrounding buildings. The proposed building design is comparable to the bulk of the immediate surrounding buildings, but the scale and the rhythm is more residential as a result of the varied materials, colors, roof forms, porches, and details.
Have the structures been sited to minimize any adverse impacts on the surrounding area, in your opinion?
Yes, the site was designed with respect to the more centralized and unified layout. Therefore, there should be minimal adverse impact with the surrounding.
Would you take a moment just to talk about the proposed lighting? We have a new exhibit contained in the booklet, and the chairman referred to it, but take a moment and describe the lighting strategy, if you would.
Yes, the overall site lighting strategy considers safety, efficiency, durability, aesthetic, and balance that with the project budget and the other requirements. Site light fixtures are selected to achieve an appropriate distribution of light levels throughout the site. It is LED light fixture, energy efficient and dark sky friendly, and also porch lights are provided to all unit entrances as well.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple of other standards I'd like you to address or just give me an answer to pertaining to plan developments. Do you believe that the plan development standards and the locations of the buildings, open spaces, and pedestrian vehicular circulation are adequate and efficient and safe?
Yes.
Would you consider this high quality design?
Of course I do.
I hope so, right? Do you believe that the code standards are satisfied from your architectural point of view?
Yes, I do.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, no further questions at this time for Mr. Lee.
Any questions by commissioners? Mr. Chang. Okay, thank you, Mr. Lee. Mr. Hyatt.
I'll move right along, call Vernon Husted as my next witness. Mr.
Good evening, Mr. Hyatt.
You testified many times before the boards and commissions in the city of Annapolis, but go ahead and tell them who you are.
Mr. Hyatt, how many more are we going to have?
One more after Mr. Husted.
Okay.
My name is Vernon Husted. I'm president of Husted Landscape Architecture, located at 120 Bay Meadows Lane in Stevensville, Maryland.
And your CV is contained in the package as exhibit number 10, and I assume that reflects your history, your work history, right?
Yes, sir.
You're certainly familiar with this property, right?
Yes, I am.
And you physically visited the site before, right?
I was at the site last fall, yes.
Okay, and you're familiar with the code requirements, aren't you?
I am, yes.
And that's the landscape manual, zoning and subdivision codes, and the comprehensive plan. You're well aware of all those, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Did your firm design the landscape and planning plans associated with the application?
We did.
All right, go ahead and take a moment and again, if you want to refer to tab 5, number 13 under tab 5 is a site plan, but go ahead and explain how landscaping is handled on site, please.
So there are several categories and requirements that I need to meet. The first one I look at is the requirement for buffering the site from adjacent properties. This particular site is rather easy because the properties to the east, south, and west are all wooded. Property to the north is Woodside Gardens. So we used a variety of canopy trees, evergreen trees, and flowering trees to provide a substantial buffer along that property line. The second thing I look at, and to me is one of the more important things on this project, is providing street trees along the roadway system. To me, street trees help to develop a pedestrian scale, provide shade for the road, and gives a rhythm as you go along the streetscape. And then there are also parking lots. As Mr. Kelly mentioned, there's 3 larger parking lots that we provided canopy trees to provide shade, as well as some evergreen shrubs to block the views of some of the car lights from other areas. We have a centralized open space. So we have provided some screening along the basketball courts that would provide screening to some of the other buildings in that central area. I also address foundation planting. So I want a transition zone between the building and the streetscape. And so I've shown several shrubs, perennials, and grasses, add some flowering and some more pedestrian scale things in there. There are several stormwater management devices on the property, several bioretention areas that we have used shrubs, perennials, and grasses to give some evergreen character, but also some seasonality throughout flowering things. There is a large detention pond that exists now, and we've used a meadow mix in there to provide more of a pollinator habitat as much as possible. The majority of the plants we're using are native. I'd like to think that all of them are sturdy and durable. We've chosen plants that give some flowering throughout the year or provide some evergreen character. And as I mentioned, we look for plants that promote pollinators and butterflies and bees. And also look to provide plants that make sure we're addressing crime prevention design principles throughout the site.
Over the course of the site design process, there were some additional enhancements on your landscaping. Is that correct?
That is correct. So there were several parking areas that we had removed some parking spaces, and in 2 of those places, this is on the northwest corner and on the southwest corner, we added some additional reforestation trees in there. And then next to building 2, we added some additional reforestation trees there. And I think that totals the number of 16 trees that we were increased in that area.
Okay. Do you believe your landscape plan proposed here satisfies the site design standards contained in the code?
Yes, I do.
How about all the elements taken together, the landscape elements, do they provide safe and adequate and efficient design that minimizes adverse impact on the surrounding area?
I think they do. I think they do. I think they address pedestrian scale, shading of parking lots and roads, provide seasonal interest, and as I mentioned, sensitivity to crime prevention principles.
I think you mentioned, or at least one witness mentioned, that this plan is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan. Would you briefly comment, for the benefit of the Planning Commission, why you believe this application is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan?
I reviewed the 2009 comprehensive plan and the 5-year plan update. I was surprised how many instances that the Housing Authority property was mentioned in there. The property is in a residentially zoned area adjacent to the city jurisdiction. The comp plan talks about HACA property and its focus on how to develop plans and helping them to revitalize their property. Many of the HACA properties are, as we mentioned, 50 years old, and this is certainly one that's consistent with that. Newtown 20 is considered a redevelopment project, and the comp plans discuss the desire to respect and restore the community character of these sites and weave them into the development, into the fabric of the surrounding communities. And I think the architect and the civil engineer have sort of talked about how they've done that through the location of buildings, through their materials that they've used, and the road system. Newtown 20 is in the 5-year comp plan as one of the projects that they are looking to redevelop quickly. Civil engineers talked about the circular road system and smaller road widths, parallel parking spaces. All these help to bring character to a development. Our environmentalists who will be talking next will explain how we are adding more vegetation, more reforestation to the site, so a site that doesn't have any. And I think this reforestation will expand the existing woodlands that are around the property. Planning and zoning has worked closely with the develop team to drive a design that I think creates a memorable place. And in my opinion, is consistent with what the comprehensive plan guidelines are suggesting.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my questioning of Mr. Husted.
Mr. Husted, I understand that many of the street trees that you've ordered are sycamores.
Yes, sir.
Sycamores tend to grow very high.
Yes, sir.
What kind of moisture needs do they need? Do they like a wet ground or do they like a dry ground?
They're pretty versatile in either situation, and those and oaks are used a lot in street situations. The one thing I like about the sycamore is it's just such a sturdy plant.
And if you have control over the maintenance agreement and the planting plans, what sorts of specific orders would you give to make sure that a sycamore can get enough water to actually flourish over the next 50 years?
Well, to me, the first couple of years are the most important. So I would, in the maintenance plan, make sure that we're watering this every year, especially during the dry seasons of the summer. Make sure that we're not damaging them with running into lawn mowers, or that we have enough mulch around to kind of keep people away from it.
Who monitors that?
I believe the housing authority would.
Okay. What concerns me is that given the timeline that Mr. Stewart talked about, is that it might be next summer, a year from now, by the time these plantings go in, and it would be absolutely the worst time. One might even think that one could hold off until September 21.
That would be my recommendation, is you wait to a more appropriate time to install the plants, if that turns out to be the time when it works out.
Does planning and zoning have any control over that in terms of the permitting process?
It's my impression they do.
It's your impression?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
I hate to dogpile on trees here, but the sycamores, how far are they going to be from the actual street curb, roughly?
Some of them are 5 to 10 feet.
5 to 10 feet? Wouldn't these sycamores grow pretty big? You would think after 50 years or so, they're going to start pulling up the street that close.
Well, I'm sure there are things that we can show in the details to divert the roots away from the sidewalks, like adding a piece of steel or iron to kind of have the roots go sideways versus go into the sidewalk.
It just, for street trees, a sycamore seems to be one huge tree to plant right next to a street, but I don't know. Over to you guys, professionals. Any other questions?
Yeah, what kind of specifications do you have for the soils that all of this stuff is to go into? Because you're grading the entire parcel here, and you're going to scrape off anything that's any good, but you're going to scrape it off, and you're going to be left basically with graded surface.
So I'm going to do a soil improvement plan, which will show the characteristics of the soil around planting areas, around turf areas. I guess around the stormwater management areas, we'll probably have a detail for that as well.
Is that adding any expense to what's already been budgeted?
It's not, no.
All right. Thank you.
One last item with a street tree. I was going to ask it when we got to conditions, but one of the conditions is $300 goes to the city. If you're planting the tree, what's the $300 for the city? Can anybody elaborate on that? Per street tree. Tom?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I can elaborate. That is to cover future maintenance costs. So the applicant is responsible during the bonding period, which is usually 1 year after they're planted. And then there's an additional 10% held for another year. And if the trees are living, we return the bond. But the trees still need additional maintenance after that. Watering, mulching, pruning. That's what the $300 covers.
Okay. And one other thing with the street, I believe, is going to be given back from the city to HACA for some reason. Is that street going to come back to the city for ownership and maintenance?
Yes.
The right of way, yes, that will be maintained by the city of Annapolis.
But there is a period where the right of way goes to HACA for development reasons, right?
And
as I heard.
Correct. When the street is under construction, until the bond is released, yes, it's the
Okay.
responsibility of the developer. When it then is turned over to the city, when the city, quote, accepts it in its final form.
All right, thank you. I have no further questions. Anyone else? Okay, moving on to the last presenter, Mr. Hyatt.
My last witness, Kevin Haynes, I'll call him and ask Mr. Haynes to state his name, occupation, and business address for the record.
Kevin Haynes, president of Holly Oaks Consulting, and we're located at 303 Sycamore Road in Severna Park, Maryland.
Speaking of Sycamore, there you go. So we're not going to qualify you as an expert, but just take a moment and tell the members of the Planning Commission something about your background and experience.
Sure. So I've worked in the environmental science field for over 10 years. I've worked on projects ranging in size from less than an acre to hundreds of acres, completing forest stand delineations, forest conservation plans, wetland delineations, things of that nature throughout the state in Anne Arundel County and multiple FSCs and FCPs within the city of Annapolis.
You were hired to handle the forest conservation aspects of this community?
Yes, I was.
Okay, let me refer you to section 21.71 of the city code. Did you prepare a forest stand delineation and forest conservation plans for this proposed modification of this plan development?
Yes, I did.
And there was a community meeting, was there not, just last week on the FCP? Is that correct?
Yes, there was.
And anybody participate?
Not that I'm aware of.
Never got any public comments?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. So in your professional opinion, does the FCP for this plan development satisfy the requirements of 21.71?
Yes, it does.
Why don't you take a moment and summarize how, in fact, it does satisfy 21.71? And while you're at it, there's also a tree variance that was requested. If you would describe that as well.
Sure, I will. So the proposed FCP satisfies section 2171 of the city code through two various processes. And that process is triggered because this site development plan is taking place on a unit of land greater than 40,000 square feet. So the first step in the forest conservation process is the completion of a forest stand delineation. The FSD plan maps and evaluates the site's existing natural resources, forests, and specimen or significant trees, if any of these are located on the site. The forest stand delineation plan for this project was approved by Planning and Zoning on May 27, 2020. The next step of the forest conservation process within the city is the forest conservation plan itself. In accordance with the city code, a forest conservation plan was prepared to meet the forest conservation requirements of this project. Since the property does not contain any forest on site and therefore no clearing can occur, only the afforestation ratio, which is equal to 20% of the site area, must be planted on site as part of this project. That equals 1.29 acres of planting. City code allows various forms of forestation or planting in order to meet the city code, or in order to meet the requirements. For this project, as has been discussed previously tonight, we're using two forms of planting. We're planting traditional forest, if you will, which, if you can imagine, it's a bunch of trees that are stuck together. The idea is to create a forest habitat over time. And then the second form of meeting that afforestation requirement is through the street tree planting, which we have talked about again multiple times. The traditional forest planting equates to about 1/4 of an acre, and the street tree planting is about 1.5 acres. So a total of 1.75 acres of planting around there for the site for this project, which exceeds the requirements by about close to 1/2 an acre. The plantings, the forest plantings, we just talked about the street tree plans, the forest plantings are required to go underneath a 5-year maintenance agreement per the city code. In addition, the forest conservation plan supports the city's 2036 50% tree canopy goal. As we've discussed, little canopy exists on the site, and the proposed forest conservation plan and landscape plans in concert together provide for acres of canopy over time. to touch on the variance request was submitted as part of the forest conservation plan for this project, as required for the removal of a significant tree, which has been designated by the city as trees with a diameter of 24 inches and above at 4.5 feet ground level, which are designated as priority retention areas in the city code. So the tree that's subject to the variance is a 26-inch tulip poplar. It's identified as tree number 2 on the FSC, and it stands in the vicinity of the proposed retrofitted stormwater management facility. As we have heard tonight, retrofitting the stormwater management facility will greatly improve the stormwater management of this site and upstream areas, and therefore reduce sediment and nutrient loads in the downstream waters of Crab Creek, a tidal tributary to the South River. Several justification criteria must be satisfied for the approval of a variance under the forest conservation requirements of the city code. And it's my opinion that the request to remove the significant tree meets these criteria. And that is a nutshell, or a little bit more, of our forest conservation plan.
And is it your conclusion that this plan does satisfy section 21.71 of the code?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chairman, that would conclude our case. If we need to bring back any witnesses for questioning, they're certainly available. And I would open that up at this time to any questions.
Okay, for the commission, it's already 9:35. So we'll obviously move into questions for the presenters and public comment items. After that, we'll open up the public session for comment, and we'll continue this on to the next meeting, which is in exactly 1 week and a day. So please go ahead. But before we go ahead, we also had another plan development after that to review, and we may or may not get into the beginning of that based on what happens right now. But this will be continued till the next meeting for public comment. But go ahead and ask the developer any questions if you have from the commissioners.
Saying a vacuum, I think I'll step into it. I'm going to address my question to Mr. Stewart, because I think that he's probably in the best position to make a decision. And if I could, Mr. Smith, if you could put up on the screen either page 3, the site design, the colored site design, so that we all know what we're talking about. Is that possible? And I'll start while you fiddle with that, but and you get that together. But in any case, for my fellow commissioners, it's, you know, in the fold out plans, it's page 3, and it's also later on in the landscaping. But Mr. Stewart, do we have?
Mr. Walden, this is the chairman.
Yes.
I'm going to take a quick bathroom break while you're opening up your comments. So you have the floor. Thank you, sir.
Okay, Mr. Stewart.
Yes,
Are we here?
Mr. Walden. Yes.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I want to begin by saying to you and to everybody here, everybody on your team, including our city staff, this is a really commendable project, and the way in which it has gone about is noteworthy, laudable. One of the themes that I caught from this is that you listened to people from the very beginning. And by God, I wish that more people in this world would listen to each other, because I think that you've ended up or presented to us a really very good plan. But I have a reservation, which I consider important. The good parts of this plan have been said over and over and over and over again, Mr. Hyatt, thank you. But they really are good. And in comparison to what was there before, they're miles. I can't come up with metaphors that fit how much better this is than what was before. But I do have something that I would like to point out. And I'd like to draw your attention to the community center. And to the left of the community center, there's a small parking lot for 4 cars. That parking lot for 4 cars borders abuts the playground, the tot lot playground, and of course abuts the community center. Okay. And behind the playground, there seems to be a fairly open field. And as far as I can tell, there's no bioretention facilities in that field. There's nothing there but an open field. So what we have over there, in addition to the basketball court, is we have the recreational facilities, which the people said they need. I agree with them. 4-car parking space, I have a great question about. First of all, if the 4-car parking space weren't there, you would be able to put in a larger tot lot. You would be able to put in perhaps a gazebo or an outdoor picnic shed or something of very simple construction and not expensive, but would be add to that signature identity and usefulness of that central space. But the 4-car parking space denies us that possibility. So I look at that, and it's got an entryway, and it's got a turnaround space in the middle. So it's a fair amount of surface area devoted to 4 cars. And if I look across the street, I see a parking lot. I suppose that's that northeast corner parking lot that was mentioned by your experts. And it looks to me like one could add on the, whatever it is, southern side of that parking lot, one could add in 2 spaces, if not 4. And perhaps on the street, one could add in 2 parallel parking spaces and at no loss to anything else. But what the gain would be is it would be tremendous, because you would have this wonderful community area, and now you would have more room for recreational space. And one might even consider moving the tot lot up maybe 20 feet. And then what you'd have next to the end of the basketball court, there's a very small, but nonetheless usable Frisbee field, small soccer practice area, a little touch football kind of a thing. We can't do that because of the 4-car parking spaces. So what I'm asking you to consider between now and the time that we come back for a final vote is you consider with your folks, how do we move those 4 cars to someplace else? Because I think that they're probably, your management needs them, your visitors need them, people need to have a place to park, which is close to the community center and the management offices. I get that.
Right.
Okay, but you could put in where there's a bump out to the left there on the main road, you could put in 1 or 2 parallel parking spaces that are handicapped or whatever you need to make them. I'm just saying that those 4 spaces, if moved, would have great advantage. And I don't know that we need to listen to your, I'll give you time to make a reply and to consider. I don't know that I'm even asking for one tonight. What I am asking you to do is to consider it. Because I think it would really add something here. It would add an aspect of space and pleasure and dignity to what is clearly a superb plan, given the constraints that you've had to work with. Have I said enough?
Shall I respond? Is that okay?
Yeah, I hope I'm going to like what I hear.
I hope so too. I first of all just wanted to say I really deeply appreciate the positive feedback. That's the first thing I wanted to say. That means a lot to us. The second thing is, yes, 100% we'll commit to taking a look at that. We can convene a working group on our end with our team and game plan through what those implications would be. So we will do that. The one additional thing I just wanted to add is we did actually look at this. And I'd be remiss if I mentioned, or didn't mention, sorry, our partnership with the Housing Authority. So we make decisions together. We did discuss this issue actually, and the decision was about the very reason you mentioned, making sure that parking was accommodated for not just for the residents, but for people who may be coming into the community building, visiting, providing services as part of the supportive services and tenant services programs, et cetera. So that's really what that's about. But all of that said, yes, we will get together between Penrose, HACA, and our team and consider that.
Some simple signs that say parking for visitors or management. Okay, thank you very much. I look forward to hearing your response.
Okay.
And I would also add that one of those spots is accessibility, is an accessible spot, and I would imagine that next to the community center is going to be pretty important. So let's not forget about mobility impaired folks who may need to not travel very far to get from a spot to into the community center.
And that space,
hear you.
and I don't even know if it's 4 spaces. I think the space next to it is more like a ramp or something else. Is that even a space next to the handicap space?
Yeah, typically the accessible ones are a spot plus accessible area to get a ramp out of a van. Or
there's only 3 car spaces we're talking about, really. And I do see that people need to be able to access the tot lot easily without walking too far or going too far. It's nicer to have that. But I understand what you're saying, Mr. Waldman, but I'm not 100% sure if it's that.
I'd like to see if there's a solution.
Yeah.
Because it's valuable space to gain for open space and usefulness. Okay, that's all. I'm putting it out there for you. I have nothing further. I guess I'm the chair. Does anybody else have anything further?
No, I'm back. So, but that works great. Keep going. You're on a roll.
So I'd like to just make one comment. There's so much to like here. We don't have to go over all that, but I just want to really commend you on one thing is for actually using some real thought behind the alternative parking standards and not just following the sort of junk science behind our minimum parking requirements. To actually use some reasonable analysis, talk to people, get some data, and make a decision for what's going to work in that context, and not pushing back on the junk science that we call our minimum parking requirements. So I just want to commend you for thinking about that thoughtfully. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I suppose we should take out very much more time because the poor lawyer for the next applicant is probably, quaking in his boots.
That's funny. I read into your comment there. All right. Any other commissioners have any questions for the applicant right now? Okay, and before we leave the applicant phase, and since we have Tom Smith sitting there, I believe condition number 9 on the recommendations or conditions is a holdover from another cut and paste. So we might want to remove that in regards to a homeowners association document.
I did remove that, Mr. Chairman, in the amended report I sent you on June 22nd.
Drat, foiled again. Thank you for recognizing my unprofessionalism. All right, as so removed. So if you are looking at the one I'm looking at, anyone, condition 9 doesn't really exist anymore. My apologies.
My apologies for that error.
No problem. The public hearing session is open for this item. We don't have anything in our basket at the moment. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sally Nash or anyone else from the Planning and Zoning Commission. From the website comments for this?
We received none as of this afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that jives with what I'm seeing as well. But the public comment session needs to stay open until our next meeting. Our next meeting on this item will be on Thursday of next week. We will continue this item. So public hearing is open, will remain open. Last comments by commissioners before we continue this to the next meeting in a week. Anything requested by the commissioners that be brought forth or developed by now until next week? Okay, and I'll make one last item on the sycamore trees. That's one aggravating tree I've had in lots before for me, but they are beautiful. So whatever you guys think is great. If it works, good on you. All right, we're continuing that Housing Authority City of Annapolis item till Thursday of next week. Any member of the public who's watching, please feel free to go online to the Planning and Zoning Department's website, and you can make a public comment with regards to this plan development. And please submit that on the website before Thursday at noon. That's when we generally take all the last comments and provide them forth. But if you have to make one afternoon on Thursday before our meeting at 7 p.m., it is possible that it would also make it up to us. But if members of the public, please visit the City of Annapolis Planning and Zoning Department website, and the instructions should be there. If it's not easily available to you, then please call the Planning and Zoning Department. They will assist you. All right, moving on to the next agenda item. Item 4, the site design plan review application by 106 Annapolis Street, 108 Annapolis Street, SDP 2019-002. It is 10 minutes prior to the hour, and I'll ask the other commissioners how long we want to go, but I think we can at least get through an additional 25 minutes or so of this to get this ball rolling. Any comments from the commissioners with regards to proceeding into the next item on the agenda?
All right.
Go for it.
Okay, we'll go for it then. Please, for the Planning and Zoning Department, I believe you need to make comment first.
Sure. Good evening. My name is Kevin Scott. I'm a senior planner with the Department of Planning and Zoning. This project is a major site design application. It's not a plan development. It's not a special exception. They're not asking for any variances. Case number SDP 2019-002, located at 106 and 108 Annapolis Street. That's also the name of the project. It's in the commercial portion of the West Annapolis neighborhood on Annapolis Street, approximately mid-block between Melvin and Giddings Avenue on the north side of Annapolis Street, backs up to Sigelkin Lane. And they're proposing to demolish the two existing structures that are each located on 106 and 108. And those two lots will be combined into one lot, and they're going to build a new mixed-use building containing commercial space on the ground level and 4 apartment units on the second floor. Parking will be under and behind the building access from Sigelkin Lane. I've sent over on June 16th staff report, which includes attached to it the APF report and the certification that was issued on June 1st by the Department of Planning and Zoning, as well as public comments that we received as of June 16th. Today, I sent over additional public comments that we received as of this afternoon. And I sent over Deb Schwab's resume, who's the landscape architect for this project, and also the presentation that the applicant plans to share with you all tonight. And all of that information that was sent to you is also attached on Trackit on our website.
Is that all you have from Planning and Zoning, or anyone else from Planning and Zoning want to present?
Yeah. Our recommendation is, we concur with the applicant on all of their responses to the review criteria for site design review. We're recommending approval with the standard conditions that we would put on a site design review project. And I would leave it to the applicant for their detailed presentation.
Okay, before we go into the applicant's presentation, we have quite a few representatives from Eastport on our commission here. I'll go ahead and leave it to you guys to start off first. Do you have any comments or questions from Planning and Zoning?
Well, this is West Annapolis.
I'm sorry, excuse me, West Annapolis. So go right ahead. Anyone from the Planning Commission? Sorry, I'm thinking about something else at the moment.
Well, I have a number of questions, but I think probably better to ask them in line with the applicant's presentation.
Okay.
They're sort of all over the place.
Anyone else from the commission? Okay, great. Let's move right into the developer's presentation, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Stephen Hyatt for the applicant, 106 Annapolis Street and 108 Annapolis Street, LLC. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, and Mr. Scott. You heard Mr. Scott give his introduction here. This is a major site design plan redevelopment project in the heart of West Annapolis. We have assembled a qualified team of professional architects, engineers, and landscape architects, myself included, to ensure that this project was designed in a way that will enhance the West Annapolis community environmentally, aesthetically, socially, and economically, while also maintaining compatibility with the surrounding properties. We have, the applicant and myself included, we have continuously engaged with the community and Mr. Scott and his department and staff throughout this design process, and we have directly incorporated and considered input of Mr. Scott's department and the community's input. We had a very positive community meeting some time ago as part of this process. It was very well attended, very well received, and I believe that we've received about 10 or so written letters of support from nearby residents, speaking to their encouraged anticipation for this project, which has been, not a, in the grand scheme of Annapolis projects, not a lifetime, but several years in the making. Overall, this project, which is Zone B1 in the Community Shopping District, it will replace two dated and really functionally limited buildings with a single mixed-use building that you see up on your screen there. That will be in harmony with the character of the surrounding neighborhood and the comp plan. You'll note that the West Annapolis neighborhood is designated as an opportunity area in the comprehensive plan. The project also maximizes safety, efficiency, and attractiveness, which you'll hear more about in greater detail from our team of professionals momentarily. The property fronts on Annapolis Street and backs up to Sagelkin Lane. There's going to be off-street parking beneath the structure, partially beneath, and then some at the rear of the property. We're going to have approximately a little under 4,500 square feet of commercial and retail space on the first floor, which is the ground floor on the Annapolis Street side and one floor below from Sagelkin Lane. And there will be 4 rental dwelling units on the top floor, the second floor. As for the commercial retail uses and tenants, that's undetermined at this time. This is a little speculative, but we're encouraged about the area and the community and feel that we'll bring some viable tenants to the community and to this project. Any concerns about specific uses will be addressed at the time of any permitting or special exception processes as applicable to whomever those tenants or tenant may end up being. There's adequate off-street parking, as I mentioned, with ADA accessibility. That's been provided based on the most potentially restrictive use of one space per 200 square feet, resulting in 23 parking spaces. And Sagelkin Lane will continue to serve as the vehicular access point to the off-street parking area. We've incorporated safe and efficient pedestrian access to all parking areas, vehicular drives, sidewalks, and building entrances. And as Mr. Klein will be pleased to hear, there's bike access and storage provided on the project. The proposed landscape meets the requirements of the City of Annapolis Landscape Manual, and the plantings meet the mitigation requirements for properties within the IDA critical area. The property will be enhanced with landscape improvements, and stormwater management has been designed in such a way as to eliminate any adverse impact on receiving waters, including, among other measures, utilizing permeable pavement material and microbial areas, all resulting in compatibility with the stormwater management requirements. You will hear more about this project in greater detail, but in short, the project fully complies with and satisfies the site design standards of Chapter 2162 and all other applicable chapters of the city code. So with that, what I'd like to do, if he's still with us, is introduce David Williams, who is a principal with the applicant, to share some background information on his project and his vision for this project. Mr. Williams, are you still with us?
One quick question. How many presenters are you expecting to have other than Mr. Williams tonight?
I have 2 from the applicant and 3, maybe 3.5 professionals. The architects are going to split their testimony.
Okay, to be honest with you, it wouldn't look like we would get much past that, but go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, my preference, Mr. Chairman, would be to group all the testimony together so as to keep you all from having to recall previous testimony. So if it's
keep proceeding. We just yeah, we don't want to shortchange you on your presentation either. We want to give you a fair shake. So
right. No, I appreciate that. Okay. Well, not hearing from Mr. Williams, I'll next call Mr.
I'm sorry, David. I am here, Stephen. I am here.
David, sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, listen, I will be relatively brief here. My name is Dave Williams, and I'm the founder and principal of MRE Properties. And I just wanted to, I appreciate the opportunity to address the commission. You know, as this chart will identify, MRE Properties actually owns a number of buildings in the West Annapolis area. And I, from just a quick history perspective, I live in West Annapolis, so I've lived there for approximately 10 years. My daughter lives in West Annapolis. I work in West Annapolis at 706 Giddings Street. And my wife just opened a retail store called Revival in West Annapolis. So I am very much a part of this community. I am not a professional real estate developer. My primary profession is I'm the CEO of a global advertising agency. And this is really a passion project for me. I've been blessed in my life to be relatively successful, and I'd like to see West Annapolis particularly be a more vibrant village to support its local community as I think it was originally envisioned and originally designed. West Annapolis has some phenomenal assets. Its location is fantastic. Its access to the water is fantastic. Its elementary school is fantastic. The structure of the community and the sidewalks make it a really livable community. The Growl Center is fantastic. What needs some love and support is Annapolis Street, and primarily the 2 blocks between Taylor and Melvin. And so that's really my interest here. As a local person who lives and works here, we would love to see, a more vibrant village of West Annapolis. And I think the project that we're proposing here, is a beginning to that. And, thinks it fits, certainly my interest is that it fits within the character, of the community more broadly. So thank you for allowing me to address the group.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. With that, I will next call on EJ Rumpke, who's also principal with the applicant, to share some additional background about the specific project. EJ?
Yeah, thank you, Stephen, and thank you for everyone for your time tonight. I just wanted to highlight a little bit, excuse me, you might hear my dog barking in the background here. So what you see in front of you is a site aerial of the West Annapolis neighborhood. And as David mentioned, it highlights a lot of the real estate that we've acquired in the area to date. And I wanted to point out a couple projects. The first is 706 Giddings Avenue, which David mentioned is our office building. So we're somewhat unique where we live here and we also work here, and we're trying to improve the area. We also have 2 other active development projects going on right now that will be wrapping up soon. We have a small 4,000 square foot office building right on Route Boulevard, which you'll see on the bottom of the screen that is being pointed out. That's a gateway building to the city of Annapolis that we're really excited about. We also have the redevelopment of the old PNC Bank that's right next to the Growl Center at 4 Ridgely. We're Going to have a coffee shop and juice bar that opens up in there, hopefully later this summer, early fall. That tenant's going to be a group called Rutabaga, who currently has a location on Annapolis Street, and they're going to be moving over here to take advantage of the drive-through. And then in the middle of this page, you'll see we have 3 parcels that we've acquired that are all next to each other. We are in the process of planning the redevelopment of these properties as well. Those projects will also be a major site design that will hopefully be presenting to you guys in the next couple months. So hopefully later this summer, we'll be talking about those projects. And then tonight, we're here to talk about 106, 108 Annapolis Street, which is what you see at the top of the screen right here. So can you go to the next slide, Andrew? So this just shows the project site, as both Kevin and Stephen were mentioning. The project fronts Annapolis Street. You have Seguelkin Lane in the back. We're in the middle of what is the main commercial area of Annapolis Street specifically. And like Kevin said, our goal here is to combine the 2 properties and build a mixed-use building with ground floor commercial space and apartments above it. Go to the next one, please. So what you see here are the 2 existing buildings as you see them today. I'm going to start with the one on the right. That's 106 Annapolis Street. We purchased that property in July of 2017. We bought the building. It was vacant. We quickly filled it up with an office tenant who was a tenant in there for 2 years. They recently moved out, and they're in a space on Admiral Cochran Drive right now. They moved out in February of this past year, so the building today is currently vacant. The building on the left is 108 Annapolis Street. We actually tried for many years to try and purchase this property. It was in bankruptcy and foreclosure, and it was difficult to communicate with the Bank of New York Mellon and try and buy this thing. It ended up going up for auction in December of 2018. We won the bid to purchase the property and closed on it in January of 2019. So we've owned it for about 1.5 years. The building itself has been vacant since I've been living in Annapolis. I've been here for over 5 years, and like David, I live in West Annapolis on Melvin Avenue. And ever since we've been here, the building's been vacant. So when we were able to acquire both these parcels right next to each other, that's when we began the planning process for what this project is today that we're going to talk about. So if you go to the next slide, please. So this shows you the existing block elevations. We're on the top is looking at the property from Annapolis Street, where we're centered right in the middle. And then what you see on the bottom is the project site, the 2 properties from Seguelkin Lane, looking at the back. Next slide. Here's another picture of the existing buildings, front elevation. This is Annapolis Street looking on. You've got 108 on the left and then 106 on the right. Next slide. And then this is the same thing, showing the properties from the rear, 106 on the left and then 108 on the right. So with that, I just wanted to quickly give you guys a background on who we are and a little bit of background on the site. With that, I'll hand it back to Stephen and we can get into some of the engineering work on it.
Thank you, EJ. Mr. Chairman, just could I get a update from you on how much time you think we have before I start with my next witness?
I'd say you got an easy 15 to 20 before we would want to probably continue this. 10:30, I'll be honest with you. We should probably continue the next meeting and we could, so just fit in what you think makes smart by 10:30. And I'm saying that as the chairman, but the rest of my commissioners, do you agree with that or is there disagreement with that? Any commissioners?
Fine with me. 10:30 sounds like a good cutoff point.
Yeah, it's even a little longer than I would like to, but you know what? Let's go for that. And just keep in mind, Stephen, that we'll continue on right from there and give you a fair shake at the next one, which is Thursday of next week.
You have one quick question.
I'm okay to go a little
Go
bit.
ahead, Dave. Go ahead, Dave.
10:30 is my limit.
I'm just trying to get a better idea of where this is exactly, because I know you've got Rutabaga on the corner and you've got
Dean
the
Rush.
First Cafe, and the next building would be 112, right? It looks, because it looks like it's 4 or 5. When I look at the first couple of charts you have, it's a 3rd and 4th building. So I'm not sure. Is it the 4th and 5th building or the 3rd and 4th building?
4th and 1st one.
Yeah, on your site location, you have it like the 3rd and 4th building. So I just wanted to be sure.
It's between the two antique shops, David. It's between Annapolis Antiques and Beaumont.
Okay, because when I look at the site location, it looked like it was including the first antique shop.
No, it doesn't. They did buy apparently some right of way there, but I believe the source of the confusion is on the corner, number 1. I believe that is actually 2 addresses, and so that may be why they were.
If you go back a couple slides, you'll see what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is here. I'm showing 1, 2, 3. See, and then 4, 5. Then go back a little further. And it was showing up. Sorry, not there. The big overall site location one, which I believe is that one. It's not that one. It's the one in my package. It's showing the second.
Well, we know what the right one is. How about we proceed? Is that
No,
okay?
I want to make sure it's so.
And
It's
when you
after
find
that
it, we'll come back and correct it.
Yeah. Okay.
It's 4 and 5. So you good
4
with
and
that?
5. Okay, it's not 3 and 4.
Let's roll.
Great.
Thanks for that catch, though, Dave. Appreciate it.
Sure. I just want to be sure.
Okay, sorry, Terry, you think we can get through your testimony in this lot of time, or do you think it would make sense to resume with you at the start of the next meeting?
I think we could get through it.
Okay. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will
Go right ahead.
thank you. I'll call Terry Schuman from Bay Engineering. Please state your name, your occupation, and your business address.
My name is Terry Schuman, with principal with Bay Engineering Incorporated, 2661 Riva Road, Building 800, Annapolis, Maryland, 21401. I'm a professional engineer practicing in the state of Maryland, and I've been doing this for over 30 years in the city and the surrounding counties. So,
Mr. Chairman, you have Mr. Schuman's resume as Exhibit 4, and as we heard earlier, we won't ask you to qualify him as a witness, as an expert witness. But just to clarify, Mr. Schuman, you've testified before this commission and in similar proceedings as a civil engineer before?
I have. Number of times.
Are you familiar with the property, the project, before the commission this evening?
I am very familiar, yes.
You visited the site and the surrounding neighborhood?
I have.
And you're familiar with the city code requirements applicable to the pending application?
I am. Yes, I am.
And did your firm or you handle the civil engineering work associated with this project?
Yeah, my firm has, and I have, we handled the survey, the base surveys for this property, and as well as the engineering design for the drawing package.
And how about the stormwater management? Did you all handle
And the
that?
stormwater management, yes, as well.
So I'll kind of just turn it over to you, however you want to handle it through the your slides there, jumping through site design plan requirements.
Yeah, just a couple things on this. So this this picture here just represents an existing aerial plan, and then below it is a proposed aerial plan where we just dropped in the site layout over top of it. I'll speak more about the existing aerial plan. So the site is the areas that are bordered by the yellow. There are 2 lots. The total width of the property is 100 feet, and it goes back 150 feet for a total of 15,000 square feet, or 3/10 of an acre. Doesn't show up on this plan, but there is, this site is completely within the critical area, the Chesapeake Bay critical area. It's got a designation of the intensely developed area, or IDA. The actual border of it is just to the east. If north is the top of the page, just to the east is really the limit of that critical area. But our site is completely within that critical area. And as indicated before, the zoning is B1 convenience shopping district. And you can see on this existing plan, there's there's a black heavy line that goes along Sigelkin and then cuts in. Yeah, that one. That's the zoning district line. So we're all B1 south of that line. And then the R1 district is the residential district that is down the north side. It's an unusual site. It's got Sigelkin Lane that interconnects Melvin Avenue with Giddings Avenue. So Sigelkin is a 20-foot right of way. It is a city street and an alley, if you will, that serves pretty much the parking and the uses behind these buildings that all front on Annapolis Street. I think just from a site characteristic standpoint, it does all slope from Annapolis Street down to Sigelkin. So you enter these buildings on the first floor, and then it's almost like a walkout. You have a lower level that goes out to Sigelkin Lane, and then you have access, as I said, to Giddings and to Melvin. So there's about a 7.5-foot elevation difference from Annapolis Street down to Sigelkin Lane. So it kind of slopes right there where the houses are or the structures are along Annapolis Street, and then flattens out towards Sigelkin Lane. I think we can go to the next slide. I'll talk more about the proposed on these next slides. So this is our site plan that was submitted with part of our plan development package, or I'm sorry, our site development package. So the orange represents the building, and underneath that you can see the parking below it, and you have your trash room, you have your mechanical rooms down on the lower level, and then you have your porch, which it represents really from the Annapolis Street. There'll be a porch on the upper level or the first floor. And then in the back, so the orange is the structure and the porch. The gray, the lighter gray represents a paved area. So that'll be asphalt paving. And then the darker gray with the shading is the permeable pavement areas, those 5 spaces and then 4 spaces. We have bike racks in the front and the back. So there's a bike rack there. There's also a bike rack up along Annapolis Street. We'll be widening out the sidewalk along Annapolis Street to 5 foot wide. Currently they're a little bit over, a little below 4 feet wide right now. So we widen those out. And then all the way in the back on Sigelkin Lane, that's the gravel symbol. So it's basically a dirt gravel lane. I'm going to get into that a little bit more on a subsequent slide. And the blue represents our stormwater management, our microbiome areas. So this site has 3 microbiome areas and permeable pavement, and I'll get into that in a second. It's served by public water and sewer. Public water is up along Annapolis Street, and then the sewer runs back there on Sigelkin Lane. And Sigelkin Lane all the residential units along Sigelkin Lane have their front of their street is Tucker Street, and the rear entries have access out to Sigelkin Lane. So they're kind of same as us. They're double fronted on these access roads. Let's talk about stormwater. We do meet all the city and state requirements. We are, as I said before, we have our 3 microbiome areas and our permeable pavement areas. This site is considered redevelopment because it has existing impervious greater than 40%. So with redevelopment, we will provide treatment for the 75% of the existing impervious area, both on-site and the off-site Sigelkin Lane. So we're going to be widening Sigelkin Lane, and I'll show you that on some slides here in a second. So we're going to, for all the new impervious on Sigelkin Lane, we'll provide 125% treatment, but for all the redevelopment on this property, we'll be providing the 75% requirement. Currently, there's no stormwater management on the site. It all drains in the back, and there's some storm drains that are out in Sigelkin Lane that then take them basically through the neighborhood to the north and just go basically from street to street to street. And we'll be utilizing those storm drains for our conveyance. We will provide water quality. As I said, we're going to do ESD to the MEP, and we will manage our flows back down to existing conditions so we won't impact the receiving storm drain system in any way. I think we can go to the next slide, please. And so this slide is Sigelkin. So you can see the parking area on the lower, this is a plan and profile. So I won't talk too much about the profile, but we are proposing basically to improve Sigelkin Lane from Giddings Avenue to Melvin Avenue. Currently, right now, that road is anywhere from it's 10 feet to 15 foot wide, and it kind of goes all over the place. It's basically a compacted dirt gravel road. And like I said before, it basically provides rear access to the residential units on the north side of that lane. It is a 20-foot city right of way. And it, you know, I'd say a couple months ago, it had potholes and they have been filled in since then, but it's kind of an unmaintained, it's might be maintained annually with some gravel on it, but it's I got some pictures here that I can show you in a second. So we are proposing on this plan to improve both ends of the road. So Melvin Avenue, there'll be a new standard concrete apron there. Same thing on Giddings Avenue. I think if you go out there right now, they just resurfaced Giddings Avenue, replaced a lot of the sidewalks, and then there's nothing right there at Giddings Avenue. So we'll be adding a concrete apron there, and then we're going to provide the sub base or 10 inches of gravel on Sigelkin Lane and turn that into a one-way 16-foot wide road. So you would enter from Melvin and then exit from Giddings Avenue. And as it was indicated before, trash pickup is all done down Sigelkin Lane, and you'll see that in a second in some of these pictures. Let's go to the pictures if you don't mind, the next slide. So what we wanted to do here is just give you an idea of what this Sigelkin Lane looks like. So you can see here, this is taken from Giddings, looking into the site. You can just see the puddle there, and there's not really a concrete apron there. So we'll fix all that up, and we'll widen the road out to a 16-foot wide road going back. You can see the commercial sides on the left and the residential's on the right. Go to the next picture. This is taking it a little further down. Again, you're driving along the road from Giddings toward Melvin, and you can see all the dumpsters and the cans out there from the residential areas. We, by the way, will be providing a concrete pad off the roadway surface. So our trash on our site is inside the building, and then we'll be toting it out to the road on trash pickup day. Go to the next slide. This is looking actually from Melvin's side, looking toward Gidding, and you can see the building on the right-hand side. That's one of the buildings on our tract. And you can see how the road just kind of goes in and out, and there's ruts on it on one side, some potholes. So go to the next slide. This is opposite our entrance. Again, the residential side, and these are kind of the rear access points. So all these access points will remain. We'll tie our gravel road into those. And we've worked with DPW on the details of that.
The road will remain gravel or no?
It's going to remain gravel from our project, but the city intends to go in and put the top coat of the pavement on. I don't know when.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question about that. So you're going to take it to, based on what was talked about in the APF. So you're going to take it to the point where the city can then just lay asphalt on top. Is that
right?
correct?
So a normal heavy duty road, which this would be 10 inches of graded aggregate stone, and then they put a top coat of pavement on top of that.
So let me ask you this question: if this is also Mr. Scott can chime in here too, because this is more city issue. But if the city were not to pave it, would you do something different? If you were going to leave it if it were going to remain unpaved, would you do exactly what you're doing now, or would you do something different?
We do what we're doing now. I mean, it's been unpaved for many
right,
years.
but I mean, in terms of the actual kind of aggregate you put and how you do it, does that require eventually to be paved, or could that
No, it can
Yes,
remain
the
as,
gravel roads.
no, it can remain.
So that's my question to Mr. Scott, perhaps, and maybe he can't even answer that, and it's a public works question as to why the city would want to pave that and add yet another block to their paving list of something in 25 years or 20 years they're going to have to pay to maintain. And you know, we can talk a little bit about this more, but some of the concerns I've heard are just with, you know, with traffic on the alley. And I think if it's paved, it's going to entice people. It's going to be a nice experience to drive there, and so people will drive there. So, you know, if we're concerned about lots of access in the back and you know, getting people to troll back there looking for parking spots, you know, a gravel road is a little less enticing to somebody just trolling around for parking. So
Okay.
anyway, I know those are not sort of not related to what you're talking about, but I wanted to ask the question as to whether you would treat that differently if you knew it would never get paved. But I appreciate your
No,
answer.
I think we'd be fine leaving it gravel.
Okay.
All right, and Mr. Schuman, you got 5 more minutes, and then we'll just stop you and continue on at a later point, but please proceed.
Well, wait, Mr. Schuman, while we're on this point. I read somewhere in here that if it were not paved, that there would be very fine particles that would gravitate onto this permeable paving and render it impermeable.
So maybe you could go back to the site plan. Go back to the colored site plan. And it might be easier with the colored site plan. So I think the comment came from Matt Waters in Stormwater, and he was concerned that the gravel would penetrate into the permeable pavement and clog it up. But you know, we're not bringing permeable pavement right up to the Gilkin lane. We have an asphalt area there, so there's an asphalt that's about 10 feet of asphalt there. My experience has shown that 10 feet is more than adequate enough where I don't think the issue is going to be a problem. We'll have to work that out with the stormwater engineer, with the city, but I don't believe it's going to be a problem.
Permeable pavement needs to be maintained regardless.
Yeah,
right.
You have to clean it out occasionally anyway.
Instead of once a year, twice a year, instead of twice a year, you know, whatever, 4 times a year. Why is that central lane asphalt and not permeable?
Because it's tough with the permeable pavement. When you do those turning movements, you back a car in and then turn the wheels. It eats up that. It just creates ruts, and it's just not it's tough on the permeable pavement. So typically we don't do it in the drive aisles. Stephen, good. I think I'm done with the presentation as far as that goes. I know you have a series of questions.
Yep, thank you. We can run through those pretty quick, I think.
Would there be any more presenters after this if we had extended time? Would there have been more presenters, or is that it with Terry?
No, we have 3 more witnesses.
Okay, I think in light of the time, I wouldn't go into another presenter, but I would leave it for some commissioners to ask some questions in the next 5 minutes, then we'll end it. So there would be some kind of maybe feedback at the moment to start off with. Starting with any commissioners who want to make a comment?
Well, Terry, I have a quick question. Can you just tell me what the existing impervious surface square footage is and what the proposed square footage would be?
So the existing square foot, we actually decreased it a little bit. So the existing square footage was 10,211 or 68.1%. And our proposed square footage is 10,014, 66.8%. So it's a little, we're basically reducing the impervious by about 200 square feet.
Any other questions from the commissioners at the moment? Okay, being that we have about 2 minutes left of what we agreed to, let's go ahead and end or pause, should I say, the presentation for the West Annapolis project at the moment. We will continue this presentation by the applicant on our next meeting, which is on Thursday of next week. being that said, then there would need to be time for public comment. And so we would probably need to extend the case open till the following meeting. And we do have 2 meetings set aside in the month of July. So it would mean that Wednesday meeting in July, the applicant's package would get continued to. I don't see online anyone from Planning Zoning Department that could corroborate that story. But Mr. Smith, do you have any comments of issue with that? Because that seems to me to make the most sense, because I don't see how we could successfully get public comment in time and finish this in a week. That just doesn't make sense to me. Or being fair to the public.
I would concur, Mr. Chairman, and we also have some projects that would be July 22nd.
Okay.
That we'd like to schedule for public hearing for that evening as well.
All right.
Ms. Rouse has polled the commission to see if we have a quorum. So please make sure you reply to Ms. Rouse.
And I'll be there. I think we will have a quorum. I've talked to some others, but so yes, this project will stop based on that, we'll stop the presentation at this point, continue the presentation on Thursday of next week. You will have the priority of presentations next week. And then we will continue that for public comment open until the July 22nd meeting, because we do need to give the public adequate time to comment on this. And 1 week just wouldn't have made sense from the get-go. Is there any other any other comments by commissioners with regard to that handling of the project?
I have one question. Is there anything else that Mr. Smith or Scott know about what else is on the July 2nd agenda? Is there anything else that's going to take up a lot of time?
Not for July 2nd, Commissioner Waldman, but for July 22nd, we have perhaps a modification to the Park Place plan development for the new hotel. You've seen a work session on that.
Okay.
I will also defer to Dr. Nash.
No, that's all I know of.
Good. It would be my hope that we could spend the majority of the next meeting talking about this, because I think there's a lot of good stuff to get into here.
Agree.
Okay. All right. Well, the Hyatts beat me up tonight. These guys get paid by the word, and then they hire somebody.
Ben, you're on mute, but we do need to put some exhibits in the record.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. But before I release the applicant, your project, SDP 2019-002, is now on hold for presentation until Thursday of next week. The public comments, anyone in the public, from what you've already seen, you can submit public comment online for this project, and you will also be able to submit it after our meeting Thursday next week as well. But if you want to get it in before then, as the member of the public, please feel free to enter it in with this West Annapolis project. But for the applicant, is there any issue with you continuing this presentation on the next meeting on Thursday? Is there any issue that we need to accommodate?
Not to my knowledge. I do believe that.
Sure, you weren't planning on having to continue the presentation.
No, that's all right. I think that there may be, the applicant's wife may be in labor mid-presentation.
Not in labor, I'll be here. So we should be good.
Ben, I would mention that I will be out of town next week, but I'm not really essential to the operation of this procedure. But
Roger, you're not essential, Sally. We can live with that.
Thanks, Ben. But I don't know if there's any questions about the APF, since this is our new procedure. I could answer those tonight. Or I can brief Kevin and Tom and make sure that, that they are prepared to answer any questions you might have next week.
If we started at APF comments, we could go on for another 20 minutes at least on that right now, if not 30 minutes. So, and I see some head shaking in agreement with my fellow commissioners.
Okay, then I will meet with Kevin and Tom and go over it, and so they'll be prepared for all of your questions.
That would be wonderful, and thank you. Any other commissioners have comment with regard to how we're going to handle this case by continuing it?
No.
No. Thank you very much. Okay, so item number 4 is continued for presentation till Thursday of next week, which is July 2nd.
Thank you.
Did you, Mr. Chairman, just as a point of interest, did you need to take the various exhibits and affidavits into the record, or has that already been done procedurally?
You're reading my mind. So now, as Tammy alluded to earlier, Tammy, could you please go ahead and announce over the exhibits that we had that you sent me an email as well, is Exhibit A and B?
Do it at the end.
So for this particular application, the staff report will be Exhibit A. The applicant's exhibit packet, exhibits 1 through 14 is B, and Ms. Schwab resume is Exhibit C. And the staff memorandum includes the attachments of some of the public commentary that's was.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to ask you about. There's attachment 2 that came with the staff report, so that will be included as part of the staff report. So we have 2 items, Exhibit A, Exhibit B, as Ms. Hook just explained, and we now enter those into evidence for the application.
Okay, there were 5 more public comments that I sent to you today.
Yes, they're included as part of Exhibit A as the staff memorandum, but they have also been broken out into a separate table that identifies each of the emails that were sent in.
Okay, because there were comments that were originally attached, and then there's supplemental comments that were sent today.
What if I say this? We have them from Julie Cook, Frederick DePews, Dan Sandel, Chrisman, and then Nolan. We have those in attachment number 2. Is that encompassing? Yep.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Well, that covers the exhibit entrance, and we will also get more, hopefully, public comments over the next weeks.
So, Mr. Chair, can I just add one last request for city staff is to research what the plans are for the paving of the alley, so we can have the city input on what their future plans are there for discussion next week.
And if we can add on a realistic approach for financial budgets for the city, maybe being restricted this coming year, and when a reality would be if that did happen, if you could project that. Any other requests by the commissioners?
Want to think about it, Bill, and maybe we can get a replacement soon.
It's not gone yet. It's just like me. You just continue on with the pain and discomfort until somebody really relieves you, which doesn't happen evidently.
Somebody gets appointed for your job.
So, Mr. Sale, we also need to put in the exhibits for the previous application too.
Yes, we do. And also, since public hearing is still open on item number 3 in our agenda, we had exhibits A and B for that item and listed as pretty much the same with the staff report as well as the applicant's package. We are entering those into the record. Tammy, any comments with regard to that?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments from the commissioners on those exhibits entering into the record? Okay, wonderful. Those are done. That concludes the items on our agenda for tonight. Is there anything else the commissioners want to talk about before we end this meeting and go off of our YouTube channel?
All right, Mr. Commissioner Stephen Hyde again. Because this is continued, is there any other advertising or notice requirements or posting requirements that we have, or because it's publicly known?
No.
How do we proceed with that?
You should know that.
I would think no, other than our agenda, which will have to be modified to show that it's continued to that meeting. And we'll hold that up with Jackie, but I don't believe so. Mr. Waldman, or any other previous chairs, Mr. Harold, any advisement on that?
No, I don't believe so. It's continued.
Yeah, it's kind of new ground.
No responsibility onto the applicant.
Thank you. And we'll make sure it's posted with our modified agenda that it is continued. Okay, and it's already actually on that agenda because we couldn't possibly have finished you tonight. So we'd have to modify the follow-on agenda after that one for July 22nd, which we do have the in advance almost. Okay, there's no other items. Any other issues by the commissioners or comments?
I just wanted to wish Mr. Harold the best, and don't be a stranger. Hope to see you. You know, don't be a stranger and come visit us during a meeting. Give us your 2 cents.
Right.
I have a feeling he will not be a stranger.
Exactly.
He's a great Annapolitan, that's for sure. Okay. Any last comments by the commissioners? Okay, and members of the public, please feel free to go to Planning and Zoning Department website to track our agendas and also input your public comments prior to our next meeting, no later than noon the day of, but if you have to submit one afternoon, it's possible that it could be accommodated. This meeting is hereby adjourned. And please take us off the YouTube channel.